Chapter 363. The god was missing. This was an extremely rare thing, but once it happened, it meant that there was a major change. Although the half-elf god was only a minor divine power god, he was also a true god after all. As long as he stayed in his own divine kingdom, even a powerful god would find it very difficult to kill him. Because the divine kingdom was an independent world, they were the lawmakers in the divine kingdom, and no god would easily leave his kingdom. But now there was a result that no one expected. That was, the half-elf god was not in his own divine kingdom. Gods rarely left their own kingdom. Even if they needed to appear in other worlds, they would at most send an avatar or use the body of a believer as a tool. Therefore, in the material plane, there were also saints in the half-elf church who could be the host of the gods. They had the ability to connect to the divine kingdom and could directly communicate with the half-elf god. But there was a problem. There was no trace of him in the divine kingdom of the half-elves. This weak god was not in his own divine kingdom. He was missing. None of the priests were able to contact this god, and none of their prayers were answered. Naturally, everyone had temporarily lost the ability to cast divine spells. This was a very serious matter. Although there were many Drool in the half-elves' homeland with Autumnfall as the center, the main force to protect the half-elves still came from the patron of the half-elves. His priests had been fighting against the orcs on the border of the wilderness, the ogres in the depths of the mountains, and the dwarves who were also not very friendly to the half-elves. The priests lost the ability to use magic, which was a devastating blow. So when they could not contact the god, the whole church began to operate frantically. This kind of thing had happened before. For example, the previous mistress of riches, after her disappearance, all the priests of riches were unable to cast divine spells. It was not until she returned that they were able to contact her. But at that time the church had been weakened to the lowest point, and finally the god was replaced by the successor. The disappearance of the god. It meant that he was likely to have fallen or fallen to other planes. This matter attracted the attention of many people, and even many legendary professions turned their eyes to the location of Autumnfall. As the priests lost their magic, Autumnfall urgently arranged a defensive line to prepare for the next possible attack. The fall of a god would inevitably cause an even more terrible chain of events. Whether good or evil, they would all be very interested in the followers he left behind. Right now, the most important thing for the half-elf church was to find traces of God's spirit. Because God's spirit's kingdom was still intact, he might not have fallen yet. Soren still had no idea what was going on in Autumnfall. In fact, he was very busy right now because swallowing the Eastern Sea route required a lot of manpower. At the same time, he also needed to supply materials to the outer islands while expanding his territory. This caused his finances to start to feel a little pressure. Pirate King Ashrod had left behind a lot of wealth, but not much of it could be converted into Kindler. Soren had close to 300 warships of various sizes under his command, and close to 5,000 pirates under his command. Their living expenses were not small at all. The Eastern Sea route was cut off, and a problem was placed in front of Soren. That was, no matter what hatred he had in the past, he must negotiate with the Eastern pirates. Otherwise this route would be useless. His fleet could not go to the Eastern Kingdom, and the Eastern Fleet could not enter the South Coast. There was a knock on the door. "Come in." Soren put down the document in his hand and said in a deep voice. Soon a middle-aged man who looked like a clerk came in. He bowed slightly and said, "Your Excellency. This is the news that was recently sent. Please take a look." Soren nodded gently and said, "Put it over there." Soon the middle-aged man retreated. After reading the statistics of materials and spoils, Soren reached out and picked up the stack of intelligence documents. After a little glance, he focused on the information about Whiterun and Arendelle. The south coast was a trade area, and the speed of information flow was not slow. Whiterun was still the same as before. The appearance of the red dragon had affected the trade on land, and it was now somewhat withered. Many people avoided Whiterun, so the city's business tax was reduced by more than 50%. Now that it was urgent to banish or kill the red dragon, the Parliament of Nobles also stood on the same side, hoping to attract powerful adventurers with a high reward. It would be best if it was a legendary-level team so that they could deal with the red dragon. Unfortunately, none of the adventurers who went there returned. What a joke. That was an ancient red dragon. Soren couldn't even last one round against it. Even a team of legendary professions would be useless, because its strength was comparable to that of many gods. Whiterun is done for. Soren muttered to himself, put down the document and whispered, "No one can kill the ancient red dragon at present. Before the Avatar crisis begins, that place will be its territory." But this is good. With the interruption of land trade, maritime trade will become even more important. The second was information about Arendelle. After seeing the information above, Soren couldn't help but frown and murmured, "Princess Royal is missing? She hasn't shown up for a long time? Princess Anna is now in charge of Arendelle? This is not good." Scenes of the past appeared in front of his eyes. Soren stretched out his hand and stroked the legendary curved sword, Icing Death, and slowly said, "Arendelle's prosperity is entirely supported by the strength of Princess Royal alone. Now that she suddenly disappeared for a long time, I'm afraid the situation of Arendelle is a little worrying. I don't know if she can handle it alone." Princess Royal's strength was unfathomable. But without the powerful Princess Royal, Arendelle's strength and wealth were not matched. She was not strong enough, but she had too much wealth. This was definitely a disaster. Now that Soren was far away on the south coast, he could not help much. He could only hope that Princess Royal would appear as soon as possible. After all, he always felt a little guilty for Princess Anna. He picked up a pen and wrote a paragraph on the information, asking others to pay more attention to Arendelle's situation. His intuition told him, if Princess Royal was really missing, Arendelle would be in chaos. The Battle of Raging Sand Island. Soren's harvest was still very rich. First of all, he got a lot of slaughter EXP, most of which came from himself, and a small part was provided by the mutant killer whale. Soren was also very surprised that the divine gift had such a function. Although the slaughter EXP he got was less than 10,000 points, it was an additional source. At present he had accumulated 160,000 slaughter EXP, which was enough to upgrade the wizard profession level, but not enough to upgrade the shadow dancer level. It was a pity that he could not kill the Duke of Red Dragon's wife personally. The real bulk of slaughter EXP was on her. Killing her was conservatively estimated to give more than 100,000 slaughter EXP. As for the Pirate King Ashrod, this guy only got less than 40,000 points. He was completely useless. No wonder he did not dare to fight the Swamp King. This guy's strength was no match for the Swamp King. The biggest gain in this battle was the legend point. After Soren defeated the Pirate King Ashrod, he got the highest legend point in history. Battle of Raging Sand Island, Legendary Battle. In the middle of February 1676 of the New Moon era, you had a decisive battle between the Pirate Kings on Raging Sand Island. In the battle, you killed the Pirate King Ashrod and defeated the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. Your fame has spread throughout the world's seas. Most pirates have heard of your name. At present, you have become the most powerful pirate king on the south coast. At the same time, because of the appearance of the tsunami and the incarnation of the sea goddess, people from other forces have gradually increased their attention to you. The appearance of the incarnation of the sea goddess means that your existence has attracted the attention of some gods. Therefore, some existences in the legendary realm may pay more attention to you. Legend point plus 8. 8 legend points. Soren had never gotten such a high legend point. Especially the mention of the gods' attention, it seemed to have a different kind of chill, which made Soren feel a burst of pressure. Entering the legendary realm. He was already qualified to be noticed by many gods, because the legendary realm was above the mortals. Being noticed by the gods in advance, he did not know whether it was good or bad, but he still had to go on. Soren had a clearer plan for the next step of his plan. Elemental Stone, Earth. Soren played with this legendary equipment that he first got, and his face showed a thoughtful expression. All the way until now. The role of this legendary equipment had been reduced a lot because there were fewer enemies who could force Soren to activate the stone skin. At the same time, summoning the earth elemental was not very useful in the sea. But it was not completely useless, because this legendary equipment was only a part of a certain item. This was a legendary difficulty chain quest, and the final loot was a shard of divinity. Elemental Stone, Earth, Elemental Stone, Water, Elemental Stone, Fire, Elemental Stone, Air. 4 pieces of equipment combined into one. It was a grade 3 legendary item that could summon giant earth elementals, giant water elementals, giant fire elementals, and giant wind elementals at the same time. The giant elementals were second only to the legendary elemental elders. With Soren's current ability, he was qualified to try this challenge. Moreover, there was one equipment that Soren might need to go to the desert ruins to get, and that was the rogue's artifact, Cloak of Proof Against Detection. A legendary equipment that was immune to any detection spells. Chapter 364. Late February. In the blink of an eye, a week had passed. Soren was busy preparing when he finally received a response from the Eastern Pirates. The other party wanted to sit down and talk with him. There were no eternal enemies in this world, only eternal interests. Soren was not the only one who lost when the Eastern Sea route was blocked. They also could not transport expensive goods from the east to the south coast in exchange for benefits. Compared to the fertile southern areas, the eastern desert covered a large area. Because of the energy left over from the Arcane Empire, the area of the eastern desert could reach up to 2/3 of its original size. Such a large desert area greatly limited the output of the eastern world. Trade was the most important source of income for the eastern pirates. The next morning, in the sea east of Raging Sand Island, Soren saw the fleet from the east. It was hard to believe that the largest force among the eastern pirates was actually a group of pirates controlled by a group of monks. Monks who followed the evil order. They could be seen among the desert bandits and eastern pirates. They were a very difficult enemy to deal with. This time, the one who was sent to negotiate with Soren was a monk, and it was a legendary monk. Because just as the dragon-headed warship approached, several figures flew out from the opposite eastern pirate ship. These eastern monks in martial attire directly landed on the sea, then stepped on the sea at high speed and finally landed on the deck of the dragon-headed warship. Treading wave steps. The special skill of the eastern monks belonged to a kind of secret skill that was similar to a secret skill. These monks had obvious Asian characteristics. It was not easy to describe them, but they looked 70 to 80% similar to the Indians. Soren stood on the deck with cold eyes. When the eastern monk in front of him was looking at him, Soren was also observing the other party. This was a young legendary monk. At least in terms of appearance he was not very old. His appearance was not much different from the eastern people in Soren's memory. Although his skin was more Asian, his forehead, nose and eyes had obvious Western characteristics. The other party's eyes were quite sharp, and there were thick calluses on his palms. The monks were proficient in hand-to-hand combat. It was not an exaggeration to say that their palms were like steel and iron. The most eye-catching thing about him was his skin, which had a faint golden hue to it. It was as if his yellow skin had reached a certain level and turned golden. Divine transcendence. It was a special ability unique to legendary monks. However, Soren still preferred to call it the Diamond Unbreakable Body. This was because once a monk reached the legendary realm, they would be immune to diseases and poisons. At the same time, they would never age and would only die when their lifespan was up. Ordinary weapons couldn't hurt them, and they also had an amazing resistance to magic. Legendary monks were one of the most difficult enemies to deal with. Sir. The legendary monk stared at Soren as if he couldn't believe that Soren was the legendary beheader. In terms of appearance, Soren was too young. In terms of strength, Soren didn't seem to have reached the realm of legends, at least for now. This was because a legendary profession's soul would have a kind of sublimation. As a legendary monk with high perception, he could feel this. However, Soren's reputation was accumulated by the number of people he killed. Although the monk had doubts, he didn't show the slightest disrespect. Please? Soren stretched out his hand and made an inviting gesture. At the same time he glanced at the three monks behind him. All of them were advanced professions. The eastern pirates were still so strong. When he traveled to the eastern world he saw many legendary professions. Maybe it was because of the energy mutation during the Arcane Empire, or maybe it was because the environment was too bad. Evil creatures, evil gods, and abominations often appeared in the eastern world. There was a monk monastery that even Soren didn't dare to break into when he was at his peak. It was built directly on top of the nest of an ancient evil creature. Note, the name seems to be called Magic Sunflower, a terrible evil creature that ended an era. One of the teachings of the martial monks was to guard these ancient evil creatures. This was the same regardless of whether the monks were good, neutral, or evil. The monks of the three factions came from many different monasteries, but the essence of order still existed. Their mission was to prevent the chaotic and evil life forms from causing more damage. Even among the adventurers who were mainly active in the Eastern world, there were people who claimed that they had seen a legendary monk with a professional level of 40. Soren didn't believe this. Because a professional level 40 monk's combat power was almost off the charts. Whether it was physical attacks or magic attacks, it was almost impossible to threaten him. Soren estimated that the most powerful monk in the Eastern world was only around professional level 30. Note, there was a legend that the massacre god's son who created Lunar Style and Sunfire Style was professional level 40. This was his limit. Raging Sand Island. Soren was in the hall talking with the legendary monk from the east. However, no matter how fierce the fight was, they still had to sit down and negotiate in the end. Because the east coast and the south coast were very far away, it was impossible for them to fight to the death. There seemed to be sounds of argument coming from inside. However, Vivian didn't care about these things at all. She was more interested in the three bald monks outside because she had met one of them before and he had given her a small gift. Hey! The little girl was wearing a black princess dress. She tilted her head and looked at the monks outside the door and said, "I've seen people like you before. But he seems to be much stronger than you." The monks outside the door didn't say anything and just looked at the little girl with surprise. Boring. Vivian pursed her lips as she looked at them. All of a sudden, she rolled her big eyes and said in a crisp voice, "I heard that you guys have some very powerful combat skills. Do you dare to spar with my followers?" The three monks looked at each other and one of them seemed to be eager to try. But when Vivian pulled out the candidate to compete with them, the monk's face immediately showed disappointment. He even looked a little bit dumbfounded. That's right. The candidate Vivian pulled out was Lulu Miao. Lulu Miao was wearing a pink dress today with a lot of sweet candies hidden in her pockets. As Vivian's little follower, she basically followed behind her all day. She was like her little tail. At this moment, Lulu Miao, who had just eaten a candy, was caught in front with a blank face and looked around doubtfully. Don't underestimate her. Vivian snorted and curled her lips. You might not even be able to beat her. Lulu Miao. Fight with the bald guy in the front. If you win, I'll give you a holiday and buy you whatever you want to eat. Meow. When the feline girl heard that she could eat whatever she wanted, her eyes instantly lit up. Almost without thinking, she bent her body and turned into an afterimage as she pounced forward. Then her sharp claws drew a cold light. Bang, bang. In an instant they exchanged 3 moves. Lulumo's petite figure flew out directly and then fell to the ground with a plop. She meowed with some grievance and looked at her dirty dress. Her eyes immediately showed a fierce light. She was angry. At the same time, the monk who had just fought with her looked at his chest with a stunned face. On his arm, chest, and abdomen, there were 3 faint bloodstains. The enemy's attack was not enough to threaten his life, but the speed was so fast that it made him speechless. As a monk with strong perception, he couldn't keep up with the rhythm of the opponent's attack. In the end, although he shook off the cat girl who rushed over, he was also scratched in the chest. What kind of monster is this? The face of the high-grade monk became serious. He put his hands together and made a tiger posture. At the same time, his eyes were locked on the petite cat girl in front of him. Even the high-grade monk with the wind attack ability couldn't keep up with her attack speed. The cat girl in front of him indeed had the strength to challenge him. Vivian still had a playful expression on her face. It seemed that she was full of confidence for the next battle. It seemed that victory was in her hands. Chapter 365. Bang bang bang. What happened in front of them made the 3 monks feel incredible. Because among all the professions, no one could attack faster than a monk. More importantly, the monk's ultimate skill relied on continuous blows to destroy the opponent. But now the scene in front of them completely subverted their previous understanding. Because in front of them, a cat girl who looked like a little girl, attacked faster than a high-grade monk. The dazzling attack was so fast that it challenged the retina's capture limit, especially the opponent's high agility and reaction ability. She could go up the 90-degree vertical wall by rubbing her hands and feet twice, and she could run directly against the wall. Even a martial monk had to master a unique lightness technique. What was this little cat girl's background? She was just another little girl's follower, so how strong was this little girl who looked very cute in a black princess dress? Bang bang bang. Lulu was once again shaken out. That's right. Although her attack speed was extremely fast, her weakness was also very obvious, that was, she did not have enough strength. As an agility werbeast, Lulu had very high natural agility, but her strength was probably less than 8 or 9 points. Even when she grew up, it would only be 12 or 13 points. Lack of strength naturally meant lack of lethality. It was difficult for her to fight with the high-grade monk in front of her. Even if she attacked the other party, she could only scratch the skin of the other party. With such an injury, even if she attacked dozens of times, it would be difficult to make the other party lose his fighting power. Roundhouse kick. Being forced into a corner by the little cat girl in front of him, the high-grade monk finally felt a little embarrassed. He suddenly shouted and his legs kicked out, setting off a gust of wind. The fierce whip kick directly blocked all the attack routes. No matter where Lulu attacked from, she had to take it. Meow. The little cat girl was very clever. Her natural fighting instinct made her aware of the danger, and she actually opened up a distance. Chain steps. Shock palm. As soon as the attack was interrupted by the brute force of the high-grade monk, a loophole immediately appeared. The monk in front of her shouted loudly. His figure suddenly sped up and dashed forward. He waved his palm, and the ferocious palm attack was mixed with a hidden force. If it hit the feline girl, her life might be in danger. At this moment, Vivian, who was watching the battle from the side, finally had a change in expression. Her small face revealed a rare look of nervousness and worry. Shadow leap. Just as the monk's palm of deterrence was about to hit her, Soren's figure suddenly appeared behind Lulu's back. His eyes were cold as he picked up Lulu and put her behind him. With a cold snort, he swung his fist and blocked the attack in front of him head-on. Bang! Soren's figure stood motionless in the same place, only slightly stiff for a moment. The high-grade monk took 3 steps back in a row and looked at Soren in disbelief. The other party was directly immune to the hidden force of the palm of deterrence. The other party's tenacity was so high that he was not like a rogue, but more like a legendary warrior. His attack just now was like a cow sinking into the sea. The legendary pirate king in front of him definitely had a physique far beyond that of ordinary people. This was very difficult for rogues because the direction of their training was more about their skills, not their own constitution. Stop. Soren snorted coldly, looked at Vivian with a slightly reproachful look and whispered, "Nonsense. You two go back. From today on you're not allowed to go out. I'm going to put you in confinement for 2 days." The movement outside finally alarmed the people inside. Soren just went out and saw the scene in front of him. Vivian Lawless didn't know the depth of the high-grade monk, but Soren knew that some of their unique fighting skills were quite dangerous. That was why he had just appeared to take the attack. If he hadn't appeared to take the attack, Lulu would have been seriously injured and unconscious. A 7 or 8-year-old cat girl, no matter how talented she was, without the support of a profession, it was impossible for her to be the opponent of a high-grade monk. Clap, clap, clap. There was a burst of applause. The legendary monk's figure also came out. His expression seemed a little dignified and he suddenly said, "Your Excellency really deserves to be called the legendary beheader. Your strength is really impressive." That move just now. As a legendary profession he could see a lot of things. First of all, Soren's tenacity was extremely high, almost comparable to a legendary warrior, and he was directly immune to the hidden force of the palm of deterrence. Then there was Sauron's strength. He could take a normal punch head-on and force his subordinates back. His strength was not inferior to a purebred warrior. "You flatter me." Soren turned around and stared at Vivian. The little girl seemed a little scared. She grabbed Lulu and whispered, "I just want to use them to train Lulu. Besides, she still has a unique skill that she hasn't used yet." Soren frowned and said in a deep voice, "Go back to your room. I'll deal with you later." At this time, the legendary monk in front of him suddenly seemed to have made a decision and said, "Your Excellency, since we are arguing about the distribution of the Eastern Sea route, how about this? I'll compare notes with you. If you win, everything will be according to your requirements. If I win, then we will have the right to free trade on the south coast." Compare notes? Soren was stunned for a moment, then he looked at the monk and said in a deep voice, "Okay." Sure enough, he didn't come with good intentions. This guy probably wanted to test his strength. In this case he couldn't back down. "Please?" There was a hint of belligerence in the eyes of the legendary monk. He raised his hand and made a gesture of invitation. Then his palms glowed with a faint golden color. Combat Energy Strike. After the monk's profession level reached level 10, the palms would be made into +1 rare weapons. When the profession level reached level 13, the palms would be regarded as +2 rare weapons. After every 3 profession levels, the monk's unarmed attack ability would be strengthened. The legendary monk's hands were equivalent to +4 rare weapons, and could reach up to +5. Some Eastern secret methods could train their hands into a metal-like structure. At that time, the monk's palms would be as strong as diamond. Combat Energy Strike was what adventurers called it. The original name of this ability was Kill Strike, a deadly attack ability. Shang. The legendary curved sword Icing Death appeared in Soren's palm. This level of competition didn't allow for any carelessness. Sometimes it couldn't even be done. Traceless steps. Facing the legendary pirate King Soren, the legendary monk didn't have the slightest carelessness. He started with a fierce attack and wanted to use the monk's wind attack to suppress the opponent. Penetrating Shock Palm. The legendary monk, who was proficient in unarmed attacks, approached at high speed and raised his hand to slap Soren's chest. Clang. The The slightly golden palm hit the curved sword, and a force passed through the blade to Soren's body. He couldn't help but tremble as if he had been punched in the chest. This was a combat skill to deal with a warrior wearing full-plate armor, but the monk actually used it to deal with a rogue. He was really careful. Sword form, spinning strike. The curved sword in Soren's hand drew a cold light and directly slashed toward the monk's waist. The legendary monk avoided the attack with an iron bridge, and at the same time, his legs swept toward Soren's crotch. Sweeping kick. Chain strike. Whirlwind kick. The legendary monk was proficient in continuous attacks, and the speed of the wind attack was simply dazzling. Sword form, beheading. In the face of the enemy's ferocious continuous attacks, Soren didn't panic at all. He was very clear about the monk's fighting style, which was to never show weakness. Once he retreated, he would be beaten until he couldn't fight back. He suddenly burst out and swung his sword toward the monk's head. As long as the monk kicked Soren's body, he would be exposed to the light of his sword. Moving step. Cloud ladder. In the face of Soren's counterattack, the legendary monk's expression became more and more serious. Although the enemy didn't use many abilities from beginning to end, it was these simplest moves that reflected the opponent's true strength. Incomparably powerful attributes, extremely high conditioned reflexes, astonishing dodging techniques, and an almost inhuman immunity. The penetrating shock palm, which could directly stun a warrior wearing plate armor, hit the monk's body like sinking into the sea. The figure of the legendary monk rose from the ground and rose to a height of 20 meters as if he was enchanted. His expression was quite serious and he fell from the sky like a cannonball. At the same time, his palms slammed together and a scorching breath emerged. Sun flame form. A group of flames visible to the naked eye exploded, and the scorching heat waves raged out. When the legendary monk waved his hand, a strong force also broke out, and directly shook Soren's figure upside down. Cough. Soren retreated 7 or 8 meters in a row, and suddenly rolled to stabilize his body. At the same time, he reached out and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and murmured, "I didn't expect to see this move again after so many years." Sun flame form. In the past, many people jokingly called it Nine Suns divine art, which showed how powerful it was. Sun flame form, lunar shadow form, traceless steps. The 3 ultimate moves of the legendary monk who didn't know how many people died because of these moves. Evade sight. Shadow leap. Soren's eyes became cold, and his figure escaped into the shadows as if he had completely disappeared. He was serious, because it was difficult for him to defeat a legendary monk in a head-on battle. P.S. Today's first update, there is one more update. Chapter 366. Whirlwind kick. In the face of Soren's disappearance, the legendary monk's reaction was extremely fast. He stomped his foot and inserted it into the soil. Then a whirlwind kicked up a large area of soil, and then his legs kicked up a gust of wind. The wind blew the soil away in all directions, covering a range of more than 10 meters in front of him. As expected of a legendary profession with rich combat experience. If Soren stayed in the same place after entering the shadow, the raised dust would expose his trace. However, Soren was not an ordinary rogue. He could be said to have used all his strength against the legendary monk. After his figure entered the shadow, he instantly launched Shadow Jump and left his original position. Ha! The legendary monk retracted his leg and bounced back, not daring to stay in the same place. The raised dust did not find any trace of Soren. This legendary rogue had already lurked near him. Unless the other party moved first, even he could not determine the specific location of the enemy. The legendary monk put on a defensive posture. At the same time, he moved around a circle at high speed to avoid Soren finding his weakness. In fact, without the buff spell in advance, Soren's situation was slightly disadvantageous. Fortunately, the monks were all professions with high perception. In terms of attributes, Soren was likely to have a high advantage. The legendary monk had a strong instinct to dodge. Conventional sneak attacks were easy to be detected by them. To deal with this kind of enemy, one must use a wave of offensive to gain an absolute advantage. Shadow jump. Shadow strike. Sword form, waist cut. Soren's figure strangely appeared behind the legendary monk, and at the same time he swung his sword toward the monk's waist. However, the legendary monk seemed to have expected his attack. He roared in an instant, and at the moment before Soren launched his attack, he instantly twisted his body and kicked toward him. Extraordinary perception. Monks had the highest perception to dodge, and their perception of threats was quite amazing. Tiger out. Shadowless kick. Suddenly, the legendary monk's legs turned into a blur and swept toward Soren's head at an astonishing speed, almost sealing off all of his escape routes. Evade sight. Shadow leap. Soren's figure disappeared once again, but this time he didn't put too much distance between them. Summon shadow. A distorted shadow suddenly emerged from the legendary monk's shadow. It directly rushed over and entangled the enemy in front of it. Although the distorted shadow couldn't threaten the legendary monk with the divine body, it could hinder his movement. Shadow leap. Soren's shadow step in Shadow Realm was an important skill that allowed him to use shadow step in Shadow Realm. Once again he appeared behind the legendary monk. Vampiric touch. Shadow strike. Sword form, beheading. Vivian, who had been standing next to him, came over with a murderous look in her beautiful big eyes. She said in a crisp voice, "Why didn't you kill him just now? He injured you just now." Soren stared at her and said in a deep voice, "Nonsense. Do you know how strong the monastery behind him is? It's an organization that has guarded the ancient evil for thousands of years. Even the Church of the Gods has no advantage against them. The mission of the monks was to guard the evil. As professionals in the lawful camp, they had a lot of strict doctrines. This group of people may not be kind, but they had always been maintaining the order of the world. Soren had no intention of going to war with them at all. There were also rogues in the Eastern world. Once a full-scale war started, Soren might not be able to win against those monks and rogues. Go back." Soren glanced at Lulu, who had a small mouth next to him, and said in a deep voice, "Don't mess around like this in the future. Lulu is still a child and you let her fight with a high-grade monk. What if something happens? Tomorrow Dark Blade will teach her fighting skills. You go back to the Outer Islands this afternoon. Gloria is setting up a portal to the Shadow Plane. Go back and help her set up a teleportation barrier." When the little girl heard this, she suddenly felt a little wronged and pulled Lulu away. He clearly won the fight, okay. This stupid Lulu didn't know to use a big move at the beginning. Otherwise, the high-grade monk might not have had a chance to attack. Note, Driss's part-time job was Marikai, forest goddess Ronin. This was also an advanced profession from the Eastern world. Most of them were advanced by rangers or rogues. Chapter 367. In the blink of an eye it was already March. There was only a year and a half left before the start of the Avatar crisis, and there were only about 20 months left before the fall of the goddess of magic. Soren always felt that something was chasing him from behind. Even though he had walked fast enough, he still felt that there was not enough time. Especially after the news of the demigod vampire defeating the Fear Church came back, Soren's sense of crisis became stronger. According to the original historical track, it should be the awakening of the Witch of Fear Lillian, and then she controlled the Fear Church and eventually set off a tragic massacre. But now the Fear Church's control had become the demigod vampire, and a massacre seemed to be coming. Vivian was sent back to the Outer Islands. Soren could not take the risk of further awakening her fear divinity, because as the boundary of the plane became more and more loose, the higher demons could break through the plane barrier and come to the material plane in at most half a year. The devils had already appeared, and they bewitched the mortals to provoke wars. The arrival of the higher demons was only a matter of time. During this time, the number of demon followers appearing in the material plane had become more and more frequent, and some evil organizations were carrying out taboo sacrificial rituals. Relatively speaking, the South Coast, which had just experienced a war, was quite calm. The news from all sides was not very good. The orcs had shown signs of moving south, the half-blood orcs launched a raid, and the internal friction of the human principalities increased. Even the Duke of Red Dragon's wife, who had just fought with Soren, was involved in the war to suppress the rebellion. It seemed that since March the conflicts that had accumulated over the past 6 months broke out, and at least 7 places on the whole continent broke out in wars. There was also news from Autumnfall. Soren heard that the half-elf god had disappeared, and the priests who believed in him could no longer obtain divine spells. He did not remember where the god fell to, but he remembered that he finally died in the Underdark. With the fall of this weak god, the attitude of the world towards the gods gradually changed. Everything was normal on the eastern route. The mission of the monks' monastery was to suppress those ancient evils. At least before the destruction of the demon army, many powerful monks lived in seclusion all over the world. This was their tradition. Just like the Fist Master Soren had met, he should also be cultivating somewhere. The Eastern Sea route was used to provide for the monastery's consumption. Cultivating monks also required a large amount of resources, and many secret techniques required expensive medicinal herbs to practice. Soren knew his limits. This was because he was a member of the Order faction. Coincidentally, the monk was also a member of the Order faction. Both of them valued order and rules. The person in charge of the East Coast was the half-elf first mate. He was a ruthless and decisive person. With him in control of the Eastern Sea route, nothing would happen in the short term. Therefore, after entering March, Soren prepared to return to the Outer Islands. He had to prepare for the next step. Establishing a foundation in the Outer Islands was for the next step, and the next step would be to fight against the Divine Saints. Even if Soren did not clash with the other gods, the battle between him and the Dread Lord was inevitable. He was dead. However, he wasn't completely dead yet. What Soren needed to do was to completely destroy the Dread Lord so that he could no longer threaten Vivian's safety. There were a total of 4 elemental stones. The Earth Elemental Stone was near the Elven Kingdom, the Water Elemental Stone was in the Frost Kingdom, and the Fire Elemental Stone was in the desert. Soren was very clear about the approximate location of these 3 places, but he only knew that the last Gas Elemental Stone was in a very dangerous area. This was a legendary level chain quest. Soren obtained the Earth Elemental Stone by luck. He still remembered the huge rock giant that rushed out from under the elemental altar when they finally left. That was the real guardian. After the 4 elemental stones were combined, the level would be further improved, and finally, there would be a summoning spell close to the legendary level. Elemental Legion. In the past, this quest was completed by piling up human heads. A total of 3 groups of high-grade professions died. With Soren's current strength, he should be able to try to complete it alone. After all, his equipment was far beyond the standard at that time. The first destination was the Frost Kingdom. The situation in Arendelle seemed to be a bit bad, so Soren planned to go and take a look. He was a person who valued promises very much. The altar of the Water Elemental Stone was only about 100 kilometers away from Arendelle. There were many active ice trolls nearby. He was going to cross the north to get there, and he would pass by Arendelle on the way. Then the next stop was the Desert of Death. His first goal was to get the Fire Elemental Stone, and then find a way to get the Rogue's Artifact, Cloak Against Detection. This was the core equipment to fight against the Saints. As for the last Elemental Stone, he might need Gloria and others to go together because that place was a bit dangerous. Soren might fail miserably if he dealt with it alone. The 4 Elemental Stones could unlock a seal, and the reward was a Shard of Divinity. If it also had Divinity, then the final function was to transform someone into a demigod. Whether it was Vivian or Soren now, they could use this Shard of Divinity to advance into a demigod. Therefore, Soren was determined to get this Shard of Divinity. After all, this was one of the few ways he knew to get a Shard of Divinity without killing a god. To be honest, even if he joined forces with everyone now, he was not confident to fight against a weak Divine Spirit Saint. Because the demigod and above were immune to the legendary spell, Time Stop. Without Vivian's ultimate skill, Time Stop, the success rate of fighting against a Divine Spirit Saint began to plummet. This was the same even if they had the spell, Melf's Minute Meteor. After all, this spell could only help them break through the protection of the Divine Spirit's law, but could not directly kill the Divine Spirit Saints. Returning to the Outer Islands again was very different. The size of Port Mordor had doubled, and there were 2 more unfinished magnificent buildings next to it. They were the Sea Temple and the Wealth Temple. The 2 churches seemed to be secretly competing with each other. The materials used to build the temples were extremely expensive, and many of them had to be transported from other places across the sea. People were sometimes so realistic. The more majestic the temple was, the more likely it was to attract believers. According to this progress, it was impossible to build a temple in a year or 2. The merchant ships from the City of Wealth had approached, and the trade of the Outer Islands had attracted many people. Especially now that the war on land was getting more and more serious, the Outer Islands would help expand the influence of the Goddess of Wealth in the field of trade. The City of Mordor was still the same. It was just that the scale was larger. At the same time, green sprouts emerged from the cultivated land in the south. Spring wheat had been planted. Even if it was not a bumper harvest this year, it could ensure self-sufficiency. Soren had a lot of things to do in a short time, but no matter how many things he had to do it step by step. In the afternoon, groups of slaves were gathered, and the City of Mordor now had nearly 2,000 or 3,000 slaves. Soren stood on the high platform and looked down at the slaves below, then nodded to the red-haired female pirate next to him, and then nearly 30 slaves were brought out. I'm a person who values promises. Soren looked down at the slaves in front of him and also looked at the others. His eyes swept over the drow warrior next to him. He could feel that the other party was avoiding his sight because he was very dissatisfied with the behavior of the drow some time ago. Pata. Soren walked in front of these slaves. In front of them were two slave brothers who looked a bit like each other. They were the people saved by Vivian. Those who work hard should be rewarded. I'm not a stingy master. Soren looked at these slaves. Their expressions were a little panicked. Only the two brothers at the front were surprised because Vivian had promised that some of them would be rewarded. As your master. Soren looked down at the more than 30 slaves and said in a deep voice, I give you freedom. From today on, you will get the identity of the residents of Mordor and have your own house, property and family. Come on. Untie their shackles. There was a cry of surprise. The slaves present could not help but raise their heads with an incredulous expression on their faces. They were free? How was this possible? But the next scene made them realize that this was not a joke, because the city guards next to them untied the shackles of more than 30 slaves, and then threw a piece of rough linen clothes to them. Except for the two brothers standing in front, the other slaves were still surprised because they did not expect Soren to give them freedom. These people who were given freedom were all docile slaves. Most of them were from the mainland and only 3 of them were indigenous slaves. The so-called freedom naturally did not mean that they could come and go. They were just given the identity of the residents of Mordor, and then had the right to house, property and form a family. These people still had to work for Soren. It was just that they did not have to squeeze in stinky cages, and they did not have to be whipped by the guards. They could earn their own private wealth and at the same time, live a life far better than other slaves. Freedom? Relative freedom was also freedom. Soren had given them the greatest gift, so they did not need to think too much. Take them down. Soren turned and glanced at the red-haired female pirate and said in a deep voice, there is a house for them in the north. From tomorrow onwards they will not have to work with other slaves. Those with special skills will be assigned to other places, and those without special skills will be arranged to work at the port. These two people are very talented in farming, so let them be in charge of farming. Slaves. Population. There was still a difference between the two. Soren's next step was to turn the slaves of Mordor into a population. Of course they must be docile slaves. Those natives who were difficult to discipline would naturally be dealt with by the drows. Chapter 368. After such a long time, Gloria finally stabilized the teleportation circle that connected to the shadow plane. She opened a barrier that allowed people to come and go freely, and at the same time closed the portal at any time. The teleportation circle was full of magic traps, and even legendary professions could not sneak in quietly. Exploring the shadow plane was a very time-consuming thing because neither Soren nor Gloria could take down the wizard tower. Even if they joined forces, they might not be able to defeat the guards on the first floor of the wizard tower. 3 diamond golems, a magic construct, and a powerful thaling that was responsible for operating the wizard tower. Soren had one last preparation before he left. That was the level 5 spell, teleportation. Gloria had set up a transmission mark in Mordor City. As long as Soren learned the level 5 spell, he could come back from thousands of miles away. This was the biggest advantage of being a wizard. Unfortunately, it was difficult to master teleportation, and Soren might even need to take him on the road to learn it. There was no other way. There were too many spells that a wizard needed to learn, and the difficulty was not low. With his talent he was already fast enough. With the completion of the teleportation circle, Soren finally came to the shadow plane again. But this time there were more people, not only Soren, Vivian and Gloria, but also Fallen Witch Corinne. Corinne had done a lot of research on the Arcane Empire, and she was even more proficient in some aspects than Gloria. Gloria had been here before, but she didn't get close. However, it was the first time for Fallen Witch, so when she saw the wizard tower in front of her and the huge magic lock, she couldn't help but be shocked. What a powerful magic lock. I'm afraid it's stronger than the magic lock in the north. It's just that its power has declined and many parts have not been opened. Soren didn't say anything. In this regard, the 2 orthodox witches had more right to speak. You're really a variable in fate. Fallen Witch's eyes brightened as if there was a glimmer of hope. She murmured, maybe there's what I'm looking for here. If I don't have to go to the Nirvana mechanical mirror, then I can. She paused for a moment, then frowned slightly and said, the Sorcerer Tower is still operating. Although the energy consumption is very serious. But I can feel that the magic lock is still supplying energy to the element pool. This wizard tower has been running for so many years, there must be a Thaling in charge of maintenance. They approached the magic lock. Sauron's memory was excellent. He led them along the same path as last time through the magic lock, and approached the wizard tower. Alert! Warning! However, as soon as they got close to the tower, a mechanical voice, Intruder detected. Intruder detected intruder. Combat state activated. Guardian Golem charge. Not? Sauron's face changed drastically in an instant and he said solemnly, Retreat. It's dangerous here. As soon as his voice fell, a loud rumbling sound was heard. Then, 3 extremely tall diamond golems appeared, locked onto them and quickly rushed over. Retreat. Sauron jumped back and the others followed. The diamond golem's resistance was very high. Even a legendary spell might not be able to break them, and it was even more difficult to deal with them by relying on melee. Even Gloria's wizard tower didn't have such a top-level golem. This won't do. Fallen which followed them out of the magic lock and said, The first layer of defense is so strong, it's impossible for us to enter. There must be a half-plane in a wizard tower of this level, and I'm afraid there are countless dangers. Even the Eye of the North may not be able to come back alive. We have to find a way to cut off its energy supply. Speaking of which, Gloria and her mother couldn't help but look at the location of the magic lock. The magic lock was not only a large-scale defense facility, but also a part of the energy supply. The total energy consumption of a wizard tower was very large. If converted into electricity, it would require at least a nuclear power plant to maintain the supply. Therefore, as a defense facility, the magic lock also bore a part of the energy consumption of the wizard tower. As long as the wizard tower in front of them was still operating, even a legendary team may not be able to enter alive. Is there a way to cut off its energy supply? Gloria gently lifted her long hair and turned to look at her mother. She was obsessed with the knowledge of the arcane empire, and she should be the most familiar with it among the people present. Fallen which slightly frowned looked at the huge magic lock in front of them and slowly said, It's very difficult. But we can try, but we have to break this ancient magic lock. This may take a long time. As long as there is no wizard controlling it, the wizard tower will only operate according to the original set program. Thaling shouldn't have the authority to take over the magic lock. So, we have a 50% chance of breaking this magic lock. This time the exploration was fruitless. The diamond golem and Thaling were a solid line of defense. Sauron could barely deal with 1 diamond golem, but if 3 diamond golems attacked at the same time, even a legendary warrior wouldn't be able to withstand a round of attacks. If they wanted to explore this wizard tower, they had to cut off its energy supply. Therefore they had to cut off its energy supply. The adept tower that maintained its operation was too terrifying. If they rashly went in, there was only a slim chance of survival. As long as the energy supply was cut off, the guardian golems would not be able to operate. The defense system in the wizard tower would be automatically removed. Chapter 369. This time, Sauron left after making full preparations. Before leaving, he drew a further blueprint for the Outer Islands. According to his original layout, the population of Mordor City was about 50,000 people, which was already a large city in the current era. The port was still operated by the Church of Wealth and the Sea Church. Sauron paid more attention to the land, and his future focus was also on the land. When his strength had accumulated to a certain extent, he might directly go to Treasure Island, where the wealth was enough to easily replace the overseas trade. After all, no matter how profitable the trade was, it was not as profitable as mining gold. In the future, it would be quite difficult to change from a pirate to a higher class without the support of a gold mine. Note, Treasure Island was mentioned before, and the Outer Islands have rich mineral resources. It was much more convenient to travel alone. Sauron directly drove the ghost ship, Deadman's Voice, along the overseas route to Shipwreck Bay. There was no need to resupply on the way. After a little inspection of the slave black market, he went to the north. The north was located in the northwest of the continent. The Frost Kingdom was located in the northernmost position, so Sauron's voyage this time was quite long. If he wanted to collect the other 3 elemental stones, he would need to travel almost half of the continent. From the south to the north, from the north to the east, and finally across the Desert of Death into the Underdark, because the last elemental stone was somewhere in the Underdark. A place where he might encounter a beholder. Back in the north again, Sauron's mood was very different. He landed from the deep-water port and left the ghost ship in the nearby sea. The port was still bustling with noise and excitement. However, in the noisy crowd there were many more people with weapons. Even some half-grown children had a dagger hidden in their waists. Soren could not help but frown slightly. He walked along the road and saw many wanted posters as he approached the gate of the deep-water port. There were humans, dwarves, and lizard men. The security here seemed to have deteriorated a lot compared to the last time he was here. Dozens of arrest warrants of various sizes were pasted on a notice board. The guards in charge of patrolling were also much more nervous than before. They were not as lazy as they used to be. The Adventurers Guild was more lively than before. There was even a bulletin board outside with many tasks written in bright red. For example, the few pieces in front of him. 100 miles south of the deep-water port, ancient tree town has been attacked by the dark-scaled lizard men. The number of enemies is small, and the danger level is C. The mission reward is 1,200 Kindler coins. This is an emergency mission. There will be additional rewards after completion. Ogres have appeared near Faulkner town. Recently, people have been disappearing one after another. The mayor wants to ask someone to investigate this matter and determine the number and traces of the ogres. The reward is 300 Kindler coins, and there will be additional rewards for assisting the town guards in killing the ogres. Yesterday, the deep-water port found a strange fog in the nearby waters. Some merchant sailors said that they had seen traces of the ghost ship. This is a special mission. Anyone with clues will be rewarded. Mission difficulty, B rank. Perhaps it was because the timeline was getting closer and closer to the time of turmoil, the Adventurers Guild had issued more quests than before. However, what made Soren feel a little bit dumbfounded was that there were more than a dozen bulletin boards outside, and the difficulty of the missions ranged from F to C. The only B-rank mission was to investigate the strange fog that appeared in the deep-water port yesterday. Needless to say, it must be because of Soren's arrival. Before he got close, he activated the fog summoning ability of the dead man's voice, but he didn't expect that the nearby sailors still saw a trace of it. That was why today's B-rank mission was a special investigation mission. It was really surprising to think about it. Soren also received missions from the Adventurers Guild in the past, but he didn't expect that one day he would also receive a difficult investigation mission. There was a team gathering outside the city gate. Before Soren walked out of the town, he saw the militia training. Most of them were adult men, and there were many 15 or 16-year-old children. In previous years, the militia training would not be conducted in March, which was the busy period of farming. The training would be conducted during the slack period after the wheat harvest. Therefore, as long as someone took a look at the situation, they could guess that there was a problem with the security nearby. Something big must have happened nearby for the militia to be urgently trained. Otherwise, how could there be such a time to plant spring wheat? Soren did not stay here. In fact, he had already been mentally prepared for the arrival of chaos. A catastrophe was far more than what he saw in front of him. When the real chaos came, it would be the real outbreak of the disaster. If there were no accidents. Soren should arrive in the Frost Kingdom tomorrow, but just after he left the deep-water port, a little accident happened. He saw a pile of corpses. Strictly speaking, it was a pile of corpses that had been dead for a while, and the corpses had basically begun to rot. The reason why Soren was alarmed was the stench that came from here. Corpses were not rare in this era. If it were just corpses, Soren would not care at all. However, these corpses had a distinct feature that made Soren stop. Their eyeballs were all dug out. Strictly speaking, their eyeballs were taken out. Bloody eye sockets, the eyeballs of all the corpses had been taken out. There were signs of battle on their bodies. Judging from the signs of struggle in some places, some of them had their eyeballs dug out while they were still alive, and then their throats were slit by the enemy. It was a very familiar killing method. Soren glanced at these corpses and could not help but murmur, "The Unseen? Has this group of people appeared?" The Unseen. A Cthulhu church that was not very powerful but not weak either. They believed in an Cthulhu without eyeballs. These people liked to dig out the eyeballs of their enemies after defeating them, or sacrifice to the Cthulhu they believed in with a massacre. Finally, they would dig out the eyeballs of the people they killed as a sacrifice. The reason why Soren knew them was very simple. He had received a mission to investigate another Cthulhu church. That Cthulhu church was called the Blind. There were certain similarities between the two fallen evil organizations. Soren had encountered the followers of the Unseen when he was investigating the Blind. Evil people. When Soren looked at these corpses, he pondered for a moment and was about to leave. Suddenly, a spell that made him extremely uncomfortable appeared, and then the paladin's signature spell, Detect Evil, fell on him. It was as if a mine was triggered. Soren's body exploded with an extremely rich blood-red light in an instant. As the most powerful pirate king on the south coast, Soren's hands were now covered in blood. Although he brought order to the south coast and made the lives of ordinary merchants much more stable. But it was undeniable that he controlled the black market trade, the slave trade, and squeezed other merchants for protection money. Therefore, no matter from which point of view, the evil aura on Soren's body was very strong. In this world there was only one kind of person who would cast Detect Evil on others without even asking. That was the paladin. Soren's body showed a trace of murderous intent. If there was anything in this world that he hated the most, it was undoubtedly the paladin who cast Detect Evil on others. So at this moment he had the urge to kill. But what he didn't expect was that the paladin in front of him was the first one to shout, "Die!" It was a young and handsome man. He looked like a noble because he was wearing a gorgeous full-body armor. After he cast Detect Evil on Soren, he had a righteous expression on his face and directly slashed at him with his sword. At first glance, this paladin didn't have much combat experience. The distance between the two hadn't closed, but he had already begun to accelerate. Soren could even see the trajectory of his attack with his eyes closed. This was a rookie who lacked experience. He estimated that his profession level was around grade 3, and if he wasn't wrong, it should be around grade 12. From the color of the magic aura, Soren didn't belong to the kind of people who committed heinous crimes. Therefore, after seeing such a rich blood-red light, the paladin didn't hesitate to attack. In his opinion, Soren belonged to the kind of sinner who should be judged directly. Don't be impulsive. Come back. You're crazy. Don't throw Detect Evil. A female voice came from behind the young paladin, and there were 2 or 3 other mixed voices. It seemed that this was a team of adventurers. The paladin seemed to have taken over the role of a warrior. They looked like a team of adventurers who had accepted a certain mission. And the paladin in front, after seeing the pile of corpses and Soren standing next to them, his first reaction was not to ask, but to throw out Detect Evil. What the F***ck? With a clang, Soren instantly pulled out his curved sword, Icing Death, and then rushed forward at high speed like a monk. After swinging his sword to block the paladin's attack, he slashed at his head. Oh! There was a cry of alarm. 3 figures rushed out from the side of the woods. One of the female voices sounded familiar to Soren. There were quite few people who could make him feel familiar, so after a moment of hesitation, he twisted his sword and replaced the blade with the back of the sword. Clang! Thump! The young paladin was knocked unconscious and fell to the ground like an onion. Soren turned to look at the 4 adventurers who were approaching. He glanced at them and immediately found a familiar figure. Annalyn, the young priestess who had helped them in Amber City. P.S. That's all for today. Chapter 370. Swoosh. A sharp arrow flew out from the front. Soren's ears moved slightly and he frowned. In an instant, his hand moved as fast as lightning, and in front of the other party's incredulous expression, he directly caught the arrow with his bare hands. Catching an arrow with his bare hands? There was dead silence all around, and the thief who had just shot an arrow could not help but open his mouth wide. He had just seen the paladin being stunned by Soren, and without thinking much, he shot an arrow to avoid the enemy, but he did not expect that the other party could catch the arrow with his bare hands. It was almost instantaneous. The adventurer team in front of him realized that all of them together might not be a match for this man. Soren looked at the group in front of him. A paladin, a priest, a rogue, and a ranger. The last person was wearing a robe, so it was hard to tell, but the probability of him being a spellcaster was very high. He was either a wizard or a warlock. This was a standard adventurer team. The paladin and the ranger replaced the warrior and barbarian. The rogue looked like a veteran, and his reaction was the fastest among all of them. This kind of adventurer team configuration was enough to deal with most situations. The expression on the young priest's face changed very quickly. At first, it was worry and surprise, then doubt and contemplation, and then there was a look of shock on her face. Because she recognized Soren in front of her. Half a year. Soren's appearance did not change much. What really changed was his aura. From a lowly thief in Amber City to the most powerful pirate king on the south coast. The changes that happened to him made his aura completely different. The young priest could not help but take a step forward in surprise. The rogue next to her was very alert and pulled her back. And Leah still had an expression of disbelief and murmured, "You are Soren?" They knew each other? Hearing the young priest in front of them call out Soren's name, the others could not help but breathe a sigh of relief, because the man in front of her was unbeatable. If they knew him, they might be able to avoid this battle. Even though they hadn't fought yet, the other adventurers in the party were already drenched in cold sweat. Soren had taken countless lives along the way, and this kind of murderous aura was not something adventurers of their level could handle. Not to mention, Soren also had the terrifying gaze of divinity. If it was someone with a slightly weaker willpower, they might have been so scared that their legs would have gone soft. Clang. Soren sheathed his curved sword and looked at the priestess in front of him. He nodded and said, "Long time no see." The priestess had a complicated expression on her face as she slowly said, "You're not dead. This is great. After what happened that day, I've been worried about you and Vivian's safety. But when I went to the slums the next day, it was already in ruins. I searched for a long time, but I couldn't find any trace of you. Is Vivian okay?" The expression on Soren's face softened a little and he said softly, "Vivian is fine. We've already left Amber City a day in advance." The priestess's face was full of doubts. It seemed that she had a lot of questions in her heart, such as why Soren would appear here, and how did his strength become so strong in just a little more than half a year. After such a big incident in Amber City, she also put in double the effort and finally became a grade 3 priestess. But now, it seemed that she might not be able to win against Soren. Soren didn't mean to say too much. He glanced at the other adventurers in the party and said in a deep voice, "Are you here because of other missions, or are you here to investigate the unseen?" Silence. Facing Soren's question, the others were obviously silent. The priestess's face was a little hesitant. She gritted her teeth and said, "We received a mission to investigate their identity." "Are they called the Unseen? Do you know their identity? You don't even know the situation of the Unseen?" Soren shook his head after hearing this sentence. He didn't know if they were too bold or eager to die. He said in a deep voice, "If it's really to investigate the Unseen, I suggest you go back now and ask the higher-ups to send high-grade professions. With your current strength, it's okay if you can't find them, but if you find them, I'm afraid none of you can go back alive." Alarmist talk? Or is it true? Soren's words made the others' faces dignified. The ranger and the thief next to him looked at each other and bowed slightly. "Your Excellency, do you know their situation? These people have killed many ordinary people. Recently, some people from the church have been investigating them." With Soren's strength, whether good or evil, he was worthy of them calling him Your Excellency. Soren looked down at the unconscious paladin, thought for a moment and said, "The Unseen. An organization that believes in evil gods. They like to dig out the eyeballs of their enemies after killing them, and they prefer to dig out the eyeballs of living people directly during sacrificial ceremonies. I'm not sure what kind of followers they have, but I know that there are 2 legendary professions among them. With your strength, you're simply going to die." Silence. The young priestess's expression was a little stiff and she slowly said, "But the church has no way to mobilize more people. Recently, the vampires' movements have been abnormal, and high-grade priests have been sent to deal with those vampires." Vampires? Is it related to the demigod vampire? Soren frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "What's wrong with the vampires recently?" The young priestess's face showed a little hesitation and then she said, "There are many vampire servants in the south and north. We suspect that there is a vampire church that is constantly turning ordinary people into vampires. Recently, the priests of the God of Light are gathering people. The spread of vampires has greatly threatened the lives of ordinary people. All the high-grade members in the church have been sent to deal with them." It seemed that it was really the demigod vampire Reinhardt. As the son of fear who ascended as a vampire, he had to have enough believers if he wanted to expand his divine power. Ordinary people couldn't become his believers. His core clergy was the Lord of Vampires, which greatly limited the scope of his believers. So if he wanted to expand his faith, he must turn others into vampires. But the number of vampires was too large and it would threaten ordinary people. After all, the source of food for vampires was needless to say. The appearance of too many vampire servants was definitely a disaster for ordinary people. This kind of thing was bound to attract the attention of the God of Light. As a follower of the Light of Dawn, the young priestess often needed to cooperate with the Church of the God of Light, because the Light of Dawn was one of the gods of the God of Light. "Do you want to help her?" Soren's heart couldn't help but fall into contemplation. He still had some confidence in dealing with the Unseen, but he didn't like to deal with the paladins and others may not trust him. But if he helped them get rid of the unseen, maybe he could find a way to let the people of the God of Light concentrate on dealing with the demigod vampire. As the backbone of the good faction, they would never allow creatures like vampires to spread. That was to say, the God of Light and the demigod vampire were more antagonistic, and it was basically impossible to reconcile. The demigod vampire was Soren's biggest enemy at present. And he, as the biggest pirate king on the south coast, might not be his opponent now. After all, the other party had succeeded in becoming a god. Soren didn't like to owe others. So after thinking for a moment he said in a deep voice, "Follow me. I'll help you track them." After that he turned and walked in one direction. The adventurers behind him looked at each other in surprise, and finally turned their eyes to the young priestess. After seeing her nod, they immediately came forward to help the unconscious paladin, and then quickly followed the pace of Soren, a rogue who seemed to be at the legendary level. If they had the help of this rogue, they would undoubtedly have a high chance of winning against the unseen. Soren's tracking ability had always been strong. Basically, his basic skills had been improved slightly after every battle, but because these improvements were relatively scattered, he didn't care much about the improvement of 1 or 2 points of basic skills. Naturally, there was no need to pay too much attention to it. Note, the increase of 1 or 2 points after each battle is not specifically listed. At present, his overall basic skills had all improved by 20 or 30 points compared to the past, and the improvement in wilderness survival, search, intimidation, and listening were even more obvious. Soren's tracking speed was very fast. The adventurers behind could only wake up the paladin and then quickly follow up. There was a sound of argument behind him. It seemed that the paladin who woke up still wanted to destroy the evil. Soren was not interested in this at all, but if the other party dared to come up again, he would never be merciful. A day's time passed like this. Soren followed the traces left behind at high speed, and the adventurers behind followed all the way. The paladin seemed to be very repulsed by him, but because he was defeated by Soren in one move, there was still a little fear in his eyes. If a war really broke out, they estimated that they wouldn't last more than a few minutes in Soren's hands. The next day, the traces of Soren's tracking became more and more obvious. The unseen were obviously moving in a large group, and there were probably more than 10 of them, so the traces left behind were more obvious. They tracked the unseen all the way to a place called Withered Leaf Town in the north. As they approached the town, the traces left by the unseen in the wilderness faded a lot, but according to Soren's intuition, the unseen should have entered the town. "It's here." He stopped, turned to look at the others and said in a deep voice, "The unseen should be inside. Your goal is too obvious. Let's split up and move in pairs." Chapter 371. As soon as he heard that they were going to split up, the young paladin immediately wanted to object. But at this time, the young priestess glanced at him and said, "Okay, let's do it this way. You two go together. Dino, you follow Lancaster. I'll go with Soren." The paladin opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he was interrupted by the veteran rogue next to him. He seemed to have guessed a little bit of Soren's identity. In fact, this veteran rogue had seen Soren's curved sword several times along the way. As a rogue, he had some understanding of the legendary figures of his profession. Yesterday he followed Soren for a whole day. The more he looked at Soren, the more he felt that Soren was the legendary beheader, the most powerful pirate king on the south coast. For this existence, the outside world had different opinions. Some people thought that he was a formidable figure while others thought that he was too ruthless. But there was no doubt that if anyone angered His Excellency the Beheader, they would end up in a terrible state. If the man in front of them was really Soren, the most powerful pirate king on the south coast, then they had better listen to his arrangements completely. Because compared to this rapidly rising legend, they were just a group of third-rate adventurers. This veteran rogue still believed in his own eyes. According to his judgment, there was an 80% chance that the other party was the pirate king on the south coast. In fact, he was not the only one who guessed this. The young priestess had more or less guessed this in her heart. But she did not ask because now was not the time to ask. The group soon split up. Soren entered from the other side with the young priestess, and the others entered the town in batches. The two of them acted together and the target was much smaller. In this era, the vigilance against foreign adventurers was still very strong. A group of more than 5 people would easily attract the attention of people with bad intentions. The two of them easily entered the town and then came to the inn here. The young priestess was silent behind them, and her expression was a little complicated. Yes. Her heart was also very complicated. Back then she had looked down on Soren. It wasn't because she hated Soren, but because she liked Vivian very much. She also thought that a petty thief like Soren wouldn't be able to give Vivian a good life. Then she kindly suggested that Vivian become a priestess and find a way to help Soren find a job that was more respectable. Unfortunately, Soren rejected her without hesitation. In the eyes of the priestess at the time, Soren was unappreciative of her kindness. However, time proved that she was wrong. Looking at Soren's current strength, the equipment he had, and the aura he exuded from his every move, everything told her that the petty thief of the past was no longer the same person he used to be. Not only had he become a powerhouse in the legendary realm, he might even be a character who could shake the South Coast with a stomp of his feet. Whether good or evil, right or wrong, Soren's achievements had exceeded her imagination. The young priestess thought about a lot of things in her heart. After seeing that there was no one else nearby, she finally gathered her courage and said, "Soren, is the person on the South Coast really you? I always thought it was just the same name." Soren didn't answer but nodded gently. The young priestess was shocked. She finally got the answer, but the shock in her heart was not small at all. How long has it been? From the disaster of Amber City until now, she had started a life of adventure because her original temple was destroyed. She thought her progress was fast enough, but now she had just become an official priestess, and Soren had become the legendary most powerful pirate king on the South Coast. She suddenly felt that fate was unpredictable. "Come with me." Soren glanced at the people near the inn, then grabbed the young priestess behind him and took her into an alley. The young priestess was a little stunned when he grabbed her hand, but she quickly reacted and said, "You found those unseen? Where are they?" "No." Soren shook his head and said in a deep voice, "There are vampires here." "Vampires?" The young priestess looked a little stunned and murmured, "Vampires? Have they already developed to this point?" Soren's senses were very sharp. As a top rogue in the Grey Domain, he also knew a lot about dark creatures. Just glancing in the inn, he found that there were one or two people in a somewhat abnormal state. Their skin was too pale. As residents of a town of this size, these people had to work hard every day. It was difficult for people who worked for a long time to have pale skin like them. Moreover, these people looked quite strong. At the same time, their breathing was very weak, not as strong as ordinary people. Soren's powerful observation ability could find that the rise and fall of their chests was significantly lower than that of ordinary people, only about 1/3 of the strength of ordinary people when they breathed. If a normal person breathed like this, they would probably be a little short of oxygen. They're vampires. And they should be vampire servants who had just been converted not long ago. They didn't know how to disguise themselves to look more like ordinary people. The son of the vampire? Soren's brows could not help but frown, and he secretly said in his heart, "His power has grown so fast? He actually developed his minions to such a remote place." No. The more prosperous the place, the more powerful the church organization. These relatively remote towns are the places where it is easy for him to enter. The prosperous areas were divided by the gods' churches, and it was not easy for the son of the vampire to enter. In other words, these more remote towns were weak in defense, and it was easy for vampires to infiltrate, and then gradually spread his faith and expand the number of followers of the son of the vampire. "What do we do now?" The young priestess looked at him and asked. Soren glanced around, took her and continued to walk forward and said in a deep voice, "Let's find a place to stay for the night first. Vampires like to move at night. I'll follow them and see what I can find. If the unseen are also here, there will definitely be some interaction with them." The power of the son of the vampire must be suppressed. Recently, the information collected by Soren was not very good for him in all aspects, especially the strength of the son of the vampire, which made Soren feel a deep threat. "Okay." The young priestess nodded. On the other side, the group of people who acted separately were also preparing to go around to the other side to enter Withered Leaf Town. "What?" The paladin's face showed a hint of surprise and murmured, "You said he is the legendary beheader, Soren? How could Anlia know him?" When he heard his companions say the true identity of Soren, even if he was a paladin, he couldn't help but feel cold sweat on his back. That was the most ruthless pirate king in the rumors. Maybe he didn't have any cruel behavior, but his style of doing things was extremely ruthless. There were rumors that almost thousands of people died under his hands. The paladin was not an idiot. There were so many evil deeds in the world, and it was difficult for them to control them all. Therefore, the paladin's doctrine also warned them not to act blindly. If he didn't know the identity of Soren, maybe he would still dare to fight, but after knowing the identity of Soren, he had no desire to fight in his heart. Because he was no match for him at all. He even knew very well what kind of disaster it would bring to the adventurer team if he angered the legendary pirate king. It should be him. The veteran rogue's attitude towards Soren was very good, and even had a bit of admiration. He said in a deep voice, "Worthy of being one of the strongest rogues in the legends. To be able to become the most powerful pirate king on the south coast in just a few months. His strength can be said to be unfathomable. When he first fought with you, he didn't even use much of his strength." Heroes were rarely born from rogues. The main reason was that rogues had no advantage in frontal combat, and their fighting style was used to assassination, spying, sneak attacks and so on. Therefore, most rogues liked to hide behind the scenes, which was safer for them. Soren was definitely an accident. In recent hundreds of years, there were very few rogues like him who appeared in the front, and he was a rogue swordsman with a tough fighting style. He was like the protagonist in the anecdotes of bards. In fact, the story of the rise of the evil pirate king based on Soren had already appeared in the bards' mouths, but most of them were negative comments. People regarded him as one of the most terrible pirate kings of this era. The bards would not be so bored as to describe a pirate king as a legendary hero. People's understanding of him was more of fear. But this was different among rogues. There were also legendary figures among rogues, but many of them did not show up at all, or they were mysterious figures who only left some legendary names. This was also conducive to their safety. Soren was the only legendary rogue who stood on the stage and was the leader of a force. Even if it was an organization like the Shadow Thieves that had been around for many years, the leader of the force would not blatantly let others know like him. Basically, nearly half of the rogues in the world had heard of his name and many of them admired him. Because the rogue's concept of good and evil was weak, many rogues started as thieves. There were even legends that the beheader, Soren, was just an inconspicuous thief in the past. The rogues were more optimistic about the rising figures of this profession. So Soren's reputation was very high among the rogues. Wait. The experienced rogue walking in front suddenly stopped, and then quickly came to a cemetery and said in a deep voice, "Look at these graves. The tombstones have been standing for a long time, but the soil was recently turned over." Hearing his words, the others immediately woke up and quickly came to the cemetery. Chapter 372. On the side of Withered Leaf Town was a graveyard. In this era, the remote towns rarely placed the graveyard too far away. This was similar to the tombs in the east. The graveyards were concentrated near the gathering place. Originally, other people would not pay so much attention to the graveyard when passing by, but most of the rogues served as scouts in the adventurer team. Naturally, their observation ability was much stronger. The veteran rogue glanced around and found that some of the graves in the graveyard were not right. The soil looked like it was newly turned. It should have been a few days ago. The ranger picked up a handful of soil and looked at it. He also pulled out the weeds that originally grew on the graves. He said with a dignified expression, "At most 7 days ago, someone dug up these graves. The tombstones were re-erected later." Someone moved the graves? This discovery made the other people present look dignified. The spellcaster, who had been silent from beginning to end, looked around, then cast a spell similar to detection and then said, "It was not done by the necromancer. There is no breath of the undead nearby. The graveyard here has been blessed by the priest, and it will not automatically give birth to the undead." The paladin's expression was a little angry and he said in a deep voice, "Then who did it? Blaspheming the dead is a heavy sin." The secular world still respected the dead. Generally, after being buried, they should not be disturbed. Most of the laws strictly prohibited this kind of behavior. "Open it and see," the rogue said with a dignified expression. The 4 people present heard this and looked at each other. The paladin's expression was a little hesitant, but in the end, they nodded. There was something strange about the graveyard. Soon, they dug up one of the graves that had been turned over, and then they found that the coffin in the grave was empty. Dark creatures. The ranger sniffed inside and said in a deep voice, "This disgusting smell is definitely from dark creatures. I remember their hatred very clearly." The rogue observed the situation of the grave and said slowly, "It may be vampires. Maybe this place has also been infiltrated by the Church of Vampires." Soren still didn't know the situation in the graveyard. However, it was much easier for him to find vampires than these people. As the sky gradually darkened, he quietly entered the tavern. The tavern was very lively. Next to the bar there was a bard who looked quite down and out. Although bards were also one of the professions, many of them were not doing well because this profession was too versatile. There were very few powerful bards. It was a complete accident that there was someone like the Helpheimer. Most of the bards were like the one in front of him, pleasing others with their performances in exchange for some rewards. Occasionally, some good-looking bards could hook up with some noble ladies so they could earn some extra money. Third-rate casting ability, third-rate combat ability, and third-rate thief techniques. Together, these are the bards. There had been some powerful bards in the past, but in order for this class to be powerful, they had to have high stats. Even Soren's stats might not be enough to support a bard that was strong in all aspects. Back then, the bards who could do this basically had special adventures or received help from the gods. In the past, there was a point of view that only those with 18 initial stats could become top-level bards. If their initial stats were that high, then they would be first-rate spellcasters, first-rate warriors, and first-rate thieves. Unfortunately, there were too few of them. And no matter what profession they advanced into, they would be the best. After all, Soren's initial stats weren't that high. The bard was telling a story in a unique way in the north, and the protagonist of the story was called Soren. That's right, he was talking about the battle between Soren and the pirate king Ashrod. This was the largest naval battle on the south coast in decades. It was spreading in all directions at a very fast speed. More and more ordinary people heard about this battle. However, the bard's story had nothing to do with the battle. In his words, the battle was more like a duel between nobles. Soren and Ashrod fought for 300 rounds. In the end, the more evil decapitator Soren killed the pirate king Ashrod and pleased the cruel sea goddess. That was the story. The main point of the story was the battle between Soren and Ashrod. How the two sides fought back and forth, and how the decapitator Soren killed the other pirate king. Most of the bard's stories were unreliable, but this artistic way of expression undoubtedly attracted the attention of others. Soren was a little surprised. He was a little unaccustomed to being the protagonist of the story, especially when the bard said that his strength was weaker than Ashrod, and that he needed to use tricks to defeat him. Soren's target soon appeared. When the sky gradually darkened, two slightly sneaky figures walked out. He quietly got up and hid in the shadows, then followed behind them. The two new vampire servants didn't find him, and it was impossible for them to find Soren's trace. They crossed the street and came to a rather luxurious mansion. Nobles. The ruler of Withered Leaf Town seemed to be a lord whose name Soren didn't remember. The two vampires entered from the back door, and it was not convenient for Soren to follow them directly. He could only wait for them to enter and quietly climbed into the yard. The breath of dark creatures. As soon as Soren entered, he felt the breath of dark creatures. There didn't seem to be many living people in the mansion. Sure enough, there is a problem here. He sneaked in with a serious expression and said to himself, "No wonder the vampires were lurking here and no one found them. It seems that the nobles who ruled here have been corrupted by them." With the upper nobles hiding the truth, even if there were signs of the spread of vampires, it could be temporarily covered up. The north was the territory of the witches. Such a remote place was a blind spot for them to manage, and the power of the temple was also quite weak. They must be destroyed. Soren frowned and listened to the movement, then quietly approached the hall. The power of the demigod vampire could not be further expanded, and this matter must be reported to the Witch Council. Presumably, they would not want a large number of vampires to appear in their territory. Patter. There was a very light sound of footsteps. Just as Soren entered the mansion, another figure followed in, but the figure who followed in was a bit special because his eyes were covered with bandages. His eye sockets were slightly sunken as if there were no eyeballs inside. Chapter 373. As soon as Soren stepped in, a figure followed him in. However, he did not go straight to the front door like Soren, but quietly entered one of the rooms from the side window. The rooms here were lavishly decorated, somewhat out of place compared to this remote town. There were even some extremely expensive oriental porcelain placed on the wall shelf in the corner. The floor was covered with a soft carpet, and the quilt in the room was expensive velvet. From any point of view, the decoration here was not something a small noble in a remote area could enjoy. There was not much farmland in Withered Leaf Town, and there were not many specialties. The tax was mainly based on the rent collected by the lord. This money was barely enough to maintain a decent life. It was estimated that in some larger cities, slightly wealthy merchants could live more comfortably than this kind of noble. But now looking at the decoration inside this house, it was at least the level of a Viscount noble, which was the luxurious decoration of a middle-level noble's private manor. This noble's background may not be clean. Soren walked around this rather luxurious mansion and realized that the identity of the other party may not be clean. Simply put, normal income could not support this kind of life. Ordinary bedrooms were decorated at this level. It was estimated that the master's bedroom was comparable to Gloria's bedroom in Whiterun City. What was Gloria's identity? She was a member of the Northern Witch Council and the actual ruler of a northern city. The gap between the status of the two was not comparable. Soren, who was moving forward, suddenly stopped. He was completely invisible and sneak, so he was not worried about being discovered by others. Just now, a vampire servant walked in front of him and did not notice Soren, who was standing 1 meter in front of him. Unless Soren had an obvious smell of blood and relied on the vampire's blood-tracking ability to find him, it was basically impossible for them to detect the existence of Soren. There was a slight noise in another room. Soren took a step back vigilantly, and then saw the door of a room with a window on the side open, but he did not see anyone. The door was gently opened and then gently closed. A rogue. There was another high-grade rogue here. The opponent's stealth ability was on par with Soren's. Soren couldn't see through the opponent's stealth, and the opponent didn't seem to notice Soren either. If it wasn't for the door suddenly opening, the two of them would have to be close enough to discover each other based on their senses and accumulated experience. But now that Soren had confirmed his opponent's location, he had the upper hand. If he wanted to, he could even kill his target within 3 seconds. But if he did that, his tracks would be exposed. Soren's curiosity was piqued, and he temporarily suppressed the thought of confirming the other party's identity. Instead, he quietly followed behind and put some distance between them. He wanted to see what the other party was trying to find out. He was definitely not a vampire. Not many people would be bored enough to sneak around in their own territory. It was obvious that he had waited for the vampire servant to leave before coming out. It was very likely that he was a lurker from another force. In such a remote town, other than Soren the Unseen, he couldn't think of any other high-level rogue. This house was relatively large. The rogue in front seemed to be familiar with it. He must have secretly come to investigate. Soren saw that he came to a door and then opened a door that led to the basement. Creak. When the door was opened, there was an obvious sound. The rogue in front seemed to be a little nervous. After opening the door, he quietly sneaked in and then closed the door behind him. Closing the door behind him was undoubtedly not a good habit. Soren had no choice but to wait for a while, and then gently open the door. There were torches on both sides of the basement, and there were stairs below that led to the depths. It seemed that there was also a tunnel. It seemed that this place had been here for a long time. As soon as he entered the basement, Soren smelled a faint smell of blood. At the corner of the stairs he saw a limp corpse. The killing method was very simple. It was a very simple kill, directly hitting the enemy's heart, and then twisting the enemy's neck. It's a master. Soren glanced at the corpse, and his expression gradually became serious. The vitality of a vampire servant was very tenacious. To be able to kill it in one blow was definitely not something an ordinary rogue could do. Either he was an experienced veteran, or he was a high-level professional with a profession level of 16 or above. Soren saw a little bit of the assassin's ruthlessness from the position where the corpse was hit. This guy may have received combat training as an assassin. Along the passage there were some strange murals. Soren didn't have time to look at them, because he found 2 more corpses in front of him. Strength close to legendary. Soren glanced at the 2 corpses lying in the corner, and his expression became more and more serious. These 2 enemies were killed in one blow without alerting the others, and at the same time 2 enemies were killed at the same time. Even with Soren's current ability, it wasn't that easy. The rogue in front of him might have a profession level of 18 or above. That was to say, he was at least a quasi-legendary rogue. As he went deeper and deeper, Soren's vision gradually widened. In front of him there was a large secret room. The most eye-catching thing was an altar-like building. In the center of the altar there was a blood pool and there were several smaller blood pools around it. No wonder these vampires didn't find out that their companions were killed. The smell of blood here was too strong, and it was basically impossible for them to smell other blood. The altar of the demigod vampire. As a dark creature that fed on the blood of the living, Soren naturally didn't expect to see anything good near their altar. However, looking at the size of these blood pools, it seemed that the vampires had been here for some time. Without dozens or hundreds of missing people, it was impossible to fill these blood pools. There was a prayer ceremony in the altar. In the center was a priest wearing a black robe, followed by an old man who was obviously dressed like a noble. Vampires didn't age, so his current appearance undoubtedly meant that he was transformed into a vampire after his body entered the state of old age. As for the reason for becoming a vampire, it was estimated that there were only a few reasons. A fanatical prayer ceremony. Soren didn't find the first rogue, but he could be sure that the other party was hiding somewhere nearby. Bring up the sacrifice. After completing the last prayer, the black-robed priest ordered the believers kneeling under the altar. One of them was brought to the front of the altar. His body was shackled with chains. From the back, he didn't seem to be an ordinary person. To deal with ordinary people, these vampires didn't need to be shackled with steel. This was a profession. Soren couldn't see the other party's appearance from the back, and he couldn't judge his profession. He could only be sure that he should be a melee profession. However, as the man was brought up as a sacrifice, Soren immediately found that the nearby shadows were distorted. Kneel. The black-robed priest shouted with a cold expression, but what responded to him was thick phlegm and a fanatical voice. The blind one is the true God. You false God believers won't be able to live for long. Boom. A heavy punch came out and the man's words were abruptly choked back. Hearing what he said, Soren immediately figured out the ins and outs of the matter. It seemed that the blind one and the vampire church had a conflict. Both sides wanted to divide this place into their own territory, and it seemed that the blind one believer was captured by the vampire. When the man on the altar was hit by a heavy punch, Soren also saw the other party's appearance when he turned sideways. The man had only one eye and the other eye socket was empty. A high-grade member of the unseen organization. Only a true fanatic would dig out his own eye. No wonder a high-grade rogue would come to save him. However, how could a rogue defeat these vampires? Soren just had a trace of doubt in his heart when he felt a vibration around him, followed by a violent noise from above. P.S. That's all for today. Chapter 374. There was a loud rumbling sound. Soren seemed to feel the vibration of the explosion, and then the vampire believers in front of him moved quickly. Some pulled out their weapons and prepared to go out to see the situation, while others hid in a panic. There were women among these vampires and they looked young. She was dressed in a standard lady's dress, and the expression on her face was a little panicked. It seemed that she had no combat experience. However, the black-robed priest's expression was very calm. He ordered a few words in a deep voice and let people go out to check the situation. At the same time, he pulled out a sharp blade and prepared to bleed the captive unseen believers. For any God's church, fanatics were the most important wealth. It was not easy to cultivate a fanatic. No organization would easily give up their fanatics, even the evil God's church. Soren had never tasted defeat all the way from killing the Swamp King to successfully slaying the dragon, and then the decisive battle with the pirate king Ashrod. After so many battles, there were not many pirates under Soren's command who worshipped him fanatically, but these people were the core cornerstone of his rule on the south coast. As long as these fanatic elite pirates were not exhausted, he could make a comeback in any situation. Under normal circumstances, the number of fanatics within a God's church was at most 1 in 1,000. If it was other forces, this proportion would be even smaller. Soren's elite guards were currently only 100 people. Among them, the proportion of fanatics who worshipped him was less than 1/3. These people had experienced the Battle of the Swamp King, the dragon-slaying battle, and the decisive battle on the south coast. For the unseen organization, a high-grade fanatic could not be easily given up. Just as the black-robed priest was about to cut the throat of the sacrifice, the high-grade rogue who had been hiding in the dark finally could not sit still. A distorted shadow emerged, and the high-grade rogue instantly crossed the plane of space and appeared behind the black-robed priest in the form of Shadow Jump. A fierce cold light emerged. The high-grade rogue instantly stabbed the priest's heart, but what came out was the sound of metal colliding. Clang. The black-robed priest's clothes were torn open, revealing a full body armor forged with fine steel. Priest was just another name for a priest. Their fighting style was slightly different from that of a priest. However, priests were also people who could use divine spells and were equipped with full-body armor. This kind of profession was like a steel plate, and it was a steel plate profession that could use divine spells. The dagger failed to penetrate the full-body armor of the black-robed priest. The high-grade rogue turned around and slashed, and another cold light appeared and slashed at the shackles of the sacrifice. Crack. A crisp breaking sound was heard, and the steel shackles were directly cut off. Adamantine weapon? Soren, who was hiding in the dark, couldn't help but tremble in shock. He then thought to himself, to be able to directly cut through the shackles made of stainless steel, it seems that apart from first-rate legendary equipment, only adamantine weapons can do that. That ray of light doesn't seem to be a first-rate legendary weapon, so the possibility of it being a fine gold weapon is extremely high. Brr. An angry growl sounded. As soon as his shackles were cut off, the captive on the altar let out a furious roar and directly slammed into the person next to him. Crack. The powerful impact made a vampire's chest cave in. At the same time, the man instantly grabbed the sword and cut off the head of the noble woman who was panicking at first. A series of slashing and killing. The man seemed to be a high-grade barbarian warrior. In the blink of an eye, he was like a killing machine that killed 3 to 5 vampires. Many of these vampires looked like members of this noble family. The sound of fighting came from the entrance. After the high-grade rogue cut off the steel shackles, he attacked continuously. The storm-like attack forced the black-robed priest to have no chance to use divine spells. He couldn't give the caster a chance, or the consequences would be unimaginable. Clang, clang, clang. But what was quite surprising was that in the face of the ferocious attacks of the high-grade rogue, the black-robed priest blocked them one after another. The weapons he used were a shield and a scepter, and he was not weak at all in a head-on collision. Battle priest. This was a high-grade priest who had received special combat training. He probably also learned the skill of using shields. Another cold light appeared. Soren finally saw the face of the high-grade rogue. The other party's eyes were covered with a black cloth, and there seemed to be nothing inside. He didn't know how he saw the surrounding situation. While he was frantically attacking the black-robed priest in front of him, Soren also locked onto another weapon that was slightly refracting golden light. It was a very small dagger which did not seem to be his usual weapon. Sure enough, it was a fine gold weapon. This kind of expensive metal was rare in the Underdark. The price of forging large weapons was too expensive. Even forging such a dagger was quite expensive. A small amount of fine gold could be forged into A+1 rare grade equipment. If it continued to be quantified, it would be A+2 or +3 grade equipment. The dagger in front of him was at least A+3 fine gold weapon. On the surface, the percentage of fine gold infiltration was definitely not small. A group of unseen believers attacked. These guys were easy to recognize because many of them were missing an eye. This was a fallen blasphemy ritual. After completing it, they would get an additional blasphemy bonus. The effect was similar to Soren's God's Blessing. Many sacrificial demon rituals could also get this blasphemy bonus. The more advanced ones were the emblems on the fallen witch's body, which was the top blasphemy ritual. Soren began to move. The battle between the vampires and the unseen seemed to be a bit of a draw. Dark creatures had a natural attribute bonus, and the blasphemy bonus advantage of the unseen was not obvious. However, Soren was not interested in getting involved in this kind of melee. His goal was the high-grade rogue and the black-robed priest. The fine gold dagger was of great value to him, and the priest was the key to spreading the faith of the gods. If he killed the black-robed priest, the power of the demigod vampire would be severely damaged here. Before launching the attack, Soren tore a piece of cloth from his body and tied it over his eyes. But it was not the kind of thing that was completely blindfolded just for show. Shadow leap. Shadow strike. Sword form, beheading. Soren's figure suddenly appeared behind the black-robed priest. For the black-robed priest who was resisting the attack of the unseen, Soren's sneak attack was undoubtedly worse. He couldn't even dodge or block, and he was killed under the siege of 2 high-grade rogues. The legendary curved sword in Soren's hand directly cut off the priest's head. With blood gushing out, the headless body of the black-robed priest fell to the ground. The sudden appearance of Soren surprised the unseen. However, as the black-robed priest was beheaded, especially after seeing the black cloth covering Soren's eyes, the unseen could not help but relax a little. But this moment of relaxation was extremely fatal. Soren's expression was cold as he stabbed forward again. In the unseen's somewhat stunned expression, the sword instantly pierced his heart. Pada. Soren threw away the black cloth covering his eyes and crushed the enemy's heart with a backhand twist. The unseen's incredulous expression was still on his face, but his body had lost its breath of life. Bang. The 2 corpses fell to the ground one after another. Soren quickly took out the fine gold dagger from the unseen's body. A proper strategy could kill the enemy more easily. Soren successfully killed 2 high-grade professions in one blow, and then instantly activated Evade Sight and re-entered Stealth. The scuffle continued. But now it was time for him to hunt alone. Not good. When a violent explosion came, the priestess's face immediately changed, and then she approached the place where the fire came out. Paladins, rogues, rangers, and other figures soon appeared. The movement here alarmed many people, and even the town's guards quickly approached. However, they needed time to assemble, so there was no need to expect too much from the guards of a remote town. It's the unseen. The ranger was the first to rush into the burning mansion. He glanced at the corpses nearby and said in a deep voice, "They attacked here. Something's wrong. Everyone be careful." He leaned over to look at another corpse and said in a deep voice, "It's vampires. There are vampires here. Be careful." The paladin whispered, took out a shield to protect the others and said in a deep voice, "There may be their leader below. This place is full of evil. It's very likely to be the vampire's lair. They have corrupted the nobles here." The group quickly set up a standard battle formation, and then carefully moved inside. But the deeper they went, the more surprised they were because there were all corpses inside, and there was not a single living person at all. And the way these corpses died was very strange. They even saw the body of a vampire and a believer of the unseen die directly together. It seemed that they were killed at the same time. The killing method was quite sophisticated, and many of them were killed in one blow. "There's a master." The ranger's expression was serious and he murmured, "I'm afraid it's a legendary master." The priestess heard this thoughtfully. The others also looked at each other and couldn't help but speed up because they guessed something. Finally, they saw Soren. He was wiping his curved sword on a corpse. After seeing the group of people, there was no surprise on his face. Instead, he reached out and groped the corpse a few times and said in a deep voice, "It's all settled. But there should be a few fish that escaped the net. P.S. First update, there's another chapter today." Chapter 375. The light of dawn shone down. The luxurious mansion from yesterday had been reduced to ruins. The young priestess was negotiating with a middle-aged man who looked like the captain of the guards. She took out a badge that represented the light of dawn and the badge that the Church of Glory had assigned to her as proof. In the eyes of ordinary people, the Church of Glory had a high status because they stood on the side of good and justice no matter what. There were many bodies of vampires in the ruins, and she believed that it would not be a problem for her to deal with this matter. Soren sat on the roof and played with an emblem, or rather, a coat of arms. This was found from the body of the unseen. It was engraved with a huge beholder, but unlike other beholders, its eye stalks were all cut off. The eyeballs on its tentacles were cut off one by one. Even the huge eye in the middle of its body was dug out cruelly. It opened its bloody mouth and stared in front of it. Its empty and bloody eye sockets were surrounded by a mass of twisted flesh and blood, as well as something that could not be described. Evil Eye Tyrant? Soren carefully observed the emblem and murmured, "It turns out that the predecessor of the unseen was the Evil Eye Tyrant, who defeated this monster with a challenge rating of 25. And dug out its eyes? It seems that it has embarked on the path of an evil god? Evil Eye Tyrant. A very terrible creature in the evolution of the beholder. Its strength was even stronger than the Dead Eye Tyrant. This was a variant of the beholder. There were only a few in the entire multiverse. Although Soren had been in contact with the unseen in the past, it was the first time he had gotten such an emblem. The rogue should be a core member of the unseen organization. A monster with a creature level close to 30 was preparing to become a god. The chaos must have just begun. In history, no beholder had succeeded in becoming a god. Soren was not sure if this guy had succeeded because no one had seen the real body of this evil god. Patter. When the priestess finished negotiating with the town guard, Soren also came down from the roof. "It's been negotiated." The priestess's expression was a little strange. She looked at Soren and said, "We have sent someone to inform the witch council. I think someone will come to deal with it soon. I don't think they want a large number of vampires in their territory." Soren nodded and tossed the emblem to her. "You're leaving?" The priestess raised her head and asked. Soren glanced at her and smiled. "Yes, it is. There are other things that need to be dealt with." Angelia nodded and said softly, "I hope we'll have the chance to meet again. I miss Vivian." Soren smiled. Then he turned and walked out of Withered Leaf Town. He had killed so many vampires and believers of the unseen, some of whom were nobles. This matter must be explained to the Witch Council. They had to stay and explain everything to the Witch Council before they could leave. Otherwise, the Witch Council was likely to be angry because of the death of a noble. Even the people of the Church of Radiance did not dare to offend this group of powerful witches. Soren didn't have time to stay here. Angelia and the others would have to wait for at least 3 days to deal with the follow-up work of these matters. Punishing the evil and encouraging the good and then walking away would only lead to greater chaos. There were still many trivial matters here. If a noble was corrupted by a vampire, the problems that would be implicated in the end would probably cause a lot of damage to the nearby nobles. But that should be a headache for the vampire church. Soren directly crossed the north. With the help of Fly, he crossed the ice and snow mountains and returned to this cold country again. The ice and snow here had not melted yet. Soren followed the route in his memory and went to a small town near Glacier City. When he left the north, he passed by here. Winter Spring Town. It seemed to be called this name. It was a town between Glacier City and Arendelle, with a population of thousands of households. It was not a big place but not a small one. After sleeping outside for a few days, Soren was ready to spend the night here, so he went directly to the hotel after entering the town. The passers-by were in a hurry. In just a few months, it seemed that panic had spread to this cold world. The town guard stopped Soren and asked a few questions, then warned him not to cause trouble and let him go. It seems that something has happened. Soren glanced at the nervous guards and then entered the tavern. There was news he wanted to know. In fact, the news had already spread. It was just that because of the distance, it did not reach Soren's hands in time. After all, the Frost Kingdom was too far away from the south coast. What Soren was worried about finally happened. Without the protection of the Princess Royal, Arendelle's wealth brought disaster to them. About a week ago, shortly after Soren received the news from the Frost Kingdom, Arendelle was attacked by the enemy. Not only were the Vrykul pirates entrenched in the ice islands outside the sea, but even the southern island countries also launched an attack on them. Arendelle's port was blocked. The war had not yet broken out. The fleet of the southern island countries only joined with the Vrykul pirates to ambush Arendelle's warship, temporarily cutting off the route of the Frost Kingdom. The port was blocked. This was the precursor to the outbreak of war. After the news spread, even other places were affected. There was a lot of discussion in the tavern. Some merchants complained that after the port was blocked, all the goods could not be shipped out. But more discussions were about how Princess Anna of Arendelle would deal with the crisis. Have you heard? A bearded merchant who had obviously drunk a lot burped and looked at the others. I heard that the person who led the fleet to block the port of Arendelle is a prince of the southern island country. This shameless bandit made a very rude request after blocking the port. Request? Soren, who was sitting in the corner, frowned. He glanced at the middle-aged merchant who deliberately kept others in suspense. He took out a kindler and threw it over. He said in a deep voice, "What request? I don't like to listen to people beating around the bush or I'll break your neck." The middle-aged merchant quickly reached out and caught the kindler, then swallowed and said, "I also heard it from others. The prince of the southern island country seems to be called Onsti." He sent a messenger and said, "If Princess Anna agrees to marry him, he will order the removal of Arendelle's blockade. Otherwise, Arendelle's ships will not be able to leave." Crack. The wine glass in Soren's hand shattered, and a cold murderous look appeared on his face. He said in a deep voice, "Are you sure?" Yes. The middle-aged merchant was startled by him, and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. He seemed to have sobered up a lot and his speech gradually became clearer. "I also heard it from others. I have a relative who works in Arendelle." Soren's eyes became colder when he heard this. He casually threw a kindler on the bar, then turned and walked out of the tavern. It was getting late. Soren's figure entered the night and soon disappeared into the vast night. Chapter 376. Storm. Looks like there's going to be a flood. There's a power outage, so I'm using my laptop's remaining power. I'll write as much as I can. It should be enough for 2 chapters. Under the dim light of dusk, a shadow stretched out on the road. Soren's body was covered in a large cloak as he once again entered this once bustling place. Arendelle's prosperity was supported by trade and taxes. With the port blocked by the Southern Kingdom's navy, Arendelle's trade was completely cut off. Many ordinary people lost their jobs at the port and had to find other ways to make a living. There were a lot of goods piled up near the tavern. There were hundreds of merchant ships coming and going every day. Once they were all blocked here, there was no way to transport the goods out. There were many complaints in the city, but the merchants who pursued profits naturally didn't think so much. They only hoped that the war would end as soon as possible. Soren pushed open the tavern's door. The weather suddenly changed in the evening, and it began to rain heavily. It was almost summer and the season of the storm was coming. Under the washing of the rain, the ice and snow were about to melt, and soon this cold country would be covered in greenery. Damn bastard! A drunk man raised his head and looked at Soren, who opened the door, and a cold wind blew in. He cursed, "Hurry up and close the door or I'll throw you out." Soren walked in front of him expressionlessly, then stretched out his hand and grabbed the man's neck like a duck. Then, the man who weighed more than 200 pounds was easily lifted up by him and thrown into the smelly ditch outside the tavern. The tavern finally quieted down. The others looked at Soren in surprise, and some who looked like adventurers looked at him with interest, as if they were guessing his profession. A cup of good rum. Soren shook his cloak and ordered the best rum, but he didn't drink it himself. Instead, he put it across the table. He gently tapped his fingers and waited. The others quickly turned their attention back and talked about other things. It was just throwing out a drunkard with a dirty mouth. No one would care too much about this kind of thing. Only the adventurers on the side were quite interested in Soren. About 30 minutes later, the tavern's door was opened again, and a cold man with a scar on the corner of his eye walked in. He was about 30 years old. His sharp eyes swept across the tavern, and he directly sat across from Soren. "Your Excellency." The cold man handed over a document from under the table and said, "This is what you wanted." "Yes." Soren nodded. Then he threw a diamond over, pointed at the rum on the table and said, "It's on you. When did the Thieves' Guild register my information?" The cold man was hesitant, but when he met Soren's eyes, he immediately lowered his head. "Last October. We will collect any valuable information." "Your Excellency has always been the focus of our attention." Soren nodded slightly and did not have much of an expression. He stood up and looked at the cold man in front of him. "When you have time, ask your leader to come and see me. I have something to talk to him about." After that, he turned around and walked into the heavy rain. Under the heavy rain, the docks were dead silent. Many piles of goods were placed near the warehouse. After the port was sealed, these goods couldn't be transported out. They could only be sold at a low price or stored for a short period of time. On the side of the docks were low shacks. Even the wealthy Arundel couldn't avoid a group of poor people. There were many strong men sitting under the eaves in a daze. Most of them were coolies at the docks, relying on their strength to support their families. Now that there was no work at the docks, they could only sit here and do nothing. Soren, who was walking alone in the heavy rain, was a little eye-catching. People looked at him curiously, wanting to know what this man who looked like an adventurer was going to do. Because the rain was too heavy, the patrolling guards were hiding from the rain, so under the dark night, no one disturbed Soren's work. He walked step by step to the edge of the docks, then stood in the sea. Soren pulled out a dagger that reflected a faint golden light, then he cut his palm. Drops of blood fell into the sea. When Soren put his palm into the sea, an invisible magic light spread out. What happened over there? A boy who looked at most 15 or 16 years old shook his head, then rubbed the corner of his eyes and said, "Did you see that? It seems like a light spread out." The other people around him didn't seem to see anything. Did I see it wrong again? The boy's expression was a little depressed. He reached out and grabbed his feet, then looked at the sky in a daze. Deepwater port. On the sea dozens of kilometers away from the port, there was a sudden wave. Then the sea separated to the left and right, and a black mast rushed out from the bottom of the sea. The ghost ship's sail quickly opened, and the hull of the ship broke through the waves. The drowned undead began to work. With the cold night, a fog spread out from the nearby sea. Then the ghost ship sailed at a very fast speed in the direction of Arundel. It felt Soren's call. As a quasi-legendary undead, the ghost ship had the ability to sail automatically. Snake Island. The base camp that was once destroyed had been rebuilt, but it was obviously not as large as before. Now it was just a transit station, a supply point for the overseas route. On the calm sea, a huge shadow gradually floated up. The first thing that came out of the sea was a hideous sharp bone spur, then a piece of black scales. The gigantic sea monster appeared on the surface of the sea and stayed in the same place for a moment. Then, as if it felt some kind of call, it swam towards the northern sea. Its huge body dived into the sea once again and moved forward at a speed far faster than any warship. Its master was calling it. The blood told it the location of its master. Even if it was thousands of miles away, it could track the location. Arendel's dock. Soren slowly retracted his palm. The wound on his palm had almost healed. He looked at the vast sea under the night, then turned to look at Arendel's palace and murmured, 3 more days. Chapter 377. The rainstorm continued. With the approach of the Avatar crisis, even the climate in various places was much worse. The storm in the outer islands had been raining for many days, and now the Frost Kingdom seemed to be the same. It was estimated that it would not stop for a day or two. Soren stood in the rainstorm and moved forward. With a loud rumbling sound, a flash of lightning crossed the sky. He leaped and landed on the roof, and then his figure flew across the night sky. His toes gently tapped on the roof and he was more than 10 meters away, just like a top master of lightness skill. Pada. Soren's figure landed on the top of a bell tower. He looked up at the dark sky and lightning flashed in the storm. Dang dang dang. The crisp sound spread in all directions. He sat on a high place and looked at Arendel's palace, and then gradually fell into contemplation. Soren was a person who valued promises very much, but it was not suitable for him to see Princess Anna. Not only because the time was not right but also because he could not have too many ties now. Soren was in danger. People related to him would also be in danger. If Princess Royal had not disappeared, even the incarnation of the gods would not necessarily be a threat to her. But now the Princess Royal had mysteriously disappeared. If the relationship between Soren and Princess Anna was known, especially in the near future when Soren might go to war with the Church of the Gods, the threat of Princess Anna being too close to him would increase exponentially. She was not Gloria. Gloria was a powerful northern witch and a spellcaster who was about to advance into the realm of legends. Princess Anna was just an ordinary person. Even if she was the successor of Arendelle and her status was equivalent to that of a queen, her own strength was still too weak. Soren could not show up. He might not even be able to see her again. Soren's plan had already reached the realm of the gods, and it was best not to let the outside world know that he was too close to Princess Anna. He didn't believe that Princess Royal would die like this. Perhaps when Princess Royal returned and Princess Anna's safety was guaranteed, Soren could rest assured that she wouldn't be involved in a god-level battle. He was a very cautious person. Soren had always known what he would face in the future. Thump. He stood at the top of the clock tower and took one last look at Arendel's palace before disappearing into the night. Just let everything end quietly. She might be able to guess who did all this, but she definitely couldn't bring it to the table. In the hotel room, Soren spread out a roll of documents, which recorded a lot of information about the Vrykul pirates and the situation of Prince Hans who blocked the port of Arendelle. He was the successor of the Southern Isles, a coastal country in the southwest. Its wealth and strength were not as good as Arendelle, but it was equivalent to a small principality. Soren spread out a brief map of the continent. He first picked up a quill and drew a circle in Arendelle, then found the south coast and drew a circle in Port Tylon. The outer islands, Port Tylon, Snake Island, Shipwreck Sea. These 4 locations were connected by Soren into a line, and then he drew the deep-water port in the north. The north was actually in the northwest of the continent, and the Frost Kingdom was really north. The west coast was the principality that rebelled. This route was not of much value because it was the territory of the Dark Tide Fishmen, and the power of the pirates was mainly concentrated in the northwest. Soren connected Shipwreck Sea with the deep-water port in the north with a line, and then from the north-south to the Southern Isles. The location of the Southern Isles was gradually approaching the South Pole. Although the material plane was not a planet-like world, the coordinates of the North and South Poles were still a bit similar, and they were all very cold countries. The Southern Isles was a bit like the Outer Islands but more like the Indonesian region on Earth. It was similar to a small continental plate country near the Pacific Ocean. It used to be part of the continent, but then there was a land deviation due to great destruction. Continuing south from the Southern Isles, there was an endless cold country. It used to be a vast continent, but now it was covered with blue ice. There weren't too many living people in this land, but there were quite a few living undead. They were an intelligent species with blue eyes that were similar to undead creatures, but lived in a different way. They were the products of terrible disasters caused by the destruction of the Arcane Empire. Soren had not been near the polar regions, but he had read about them. Shipwreck Sea, Deepwater Port, Southern Isles. Soren drew a line with his pen, and then drew a line from the southern island countries, all the way along the west coast to Arendelle. There was a slight cold light in his eyes, and he said in a deep voice, "The supplies can keep up. We can get supplies from the Deepwater Port through Gloria's authority, and then directly attack the southern isles from the west coast." Soren was definitely not a soft-hearted person. Since Prince Hans of the Southern Isles dared to attack Arendelle, then he must pay a painful price. Soren stared at the map in front of him. Finally, he drew a cross near the capital of the Southern Isles, and then drew a symbol of a sword under a skull. A transoceanic expedition. The main force of the Southern Isles blocked the port of Arendelle. Soren did not believe that the Southern Isles still had enough naval fleet. It was too far to support Arendelle from the south coast. It was almost equivalent to crossing the continent, but attacking the Southern Isles from Shipwreck Sea was within the scope of Soren's expedition. It was time to fight. By the way, with this expedition he could directly take the northwest coast of the north coast into his own territory. Soren stood in place and pondered for a long time. Finally he put away the map and turned to walk outside. He was now in Arendelle. If he wanted to mobilize the fleet on the south coast, he must get in touch with the wizard's means. He had not mastered the communication spell, so he needed to rely on the power of the northern witches. There were still 3 days before the full launch and he had enough time to prepare. 3 days passed quickly. In the hall of Snake Island, the pirate leaders under Soren's command were gathered. "This is the order from His Excellency." The red-haired female pirate Adele Isabella looked at the others, then took out a sealed document and said in a deep voice, "The one responsible for the transmission is the Northern Witch Council. There shouldn't be any mistakes." The half-elf first mate was also among them. However, he was now the leader of the Eastern Sea Route. He had gathered hundreds of warships under his command. Soren's promotion of him had made him the second leader of the pirate group. Of course, this was not counting the young Lady Vivian and the Northern Witch Gloria. These two had no interest in the internal power changes of the pirates. Their centers were all in the outer islands, but their status was superior. After all, these two were powerful spellcasters. What order? The half-elf first mate reached out and took the document directly, then opened the seal on it. His action inadvertently made the red-haired female pirate a little dissatisfied, but she forced herself to endure. The half-elf first mate had made several contributions in a row, and his reputation among the pirates was obviously higher than hers. This behavior did not make the others present feel dissatisfied, but it made the red-haired female pirate, who used to be the second in command, very uncomfortable. The half-elf first mate took a quick look, then his face showed an excited and bloodthirsty smile and said in a deep voice, "Your Excellency wants us to attack the Southern Isles." He handed the document to the others and soon all the pirate leaders present read it. The order was simple. Mobilize the fleets of Port Tylon, Snake Island and Shipwreck Bay to attack the Southern Isles from the west coast route to the Deepwater Port, then get supplies from the Witch Council, and then cut off the route of the Southern Isles and loot and harass the coastal cities of the Southern Isles. It also named the half-elf first mate to command the dragon-headed warship to attack the capital of the Southern Isles, but it was not a real attack, but a feint to make them feel threatened. The focus of the mission was to take the opportunity to annex the west coast and force Prince Hans to withdraw from Arendelle. "Your Excellency has issued the Pirate King's enlistment order." The red-haired female pirate glanced at the others and said in a deep voice, "All the pirates on the south coast can act together. The loot obtained from the plunder does not need to be offered. All of it will be their private loot." The south coast had the most pirates. Because of the natural sea route, the pirate group on the south coast was the most active. Eastern Sea Route, Outer Sea Route. Not all of these pirates were Soren's men. As the Pirate King, Soren was only the largest group of pirates. In addition, there were many large and small pirate groups on the south coast. These pirates were equivalent to making a living in Soren's territory. Usually they could not plunder merchant ships at will, and they had to offer a part of the loot. Under normal circumstances, this ratio was about 3 to 7, and 30% of the loot had to be offered. Now many pirates on the south coast had turned to part-time merchants, but there were many private fights. After all, it was much faster to rob than to work hard to do business. Soren issued the enlistment order. It was equivalent to ordering other pirate groups to fight together in the name of the Pirate King. All the loot belonged to them, and the name of plunder was Soren's name. In the future, if the Southern Isles wanted to retaliate, they could only go to Soren to fight. It was impossible for them to retaliate against the small groups of pirates who went to war. This was equivalent to an opportunity to rob openly. They were responding to the call of the pirate king, and they did not have to bear the consequences of plundering. Most of the consequences were borne by Soren. Revenge, suppression, pirate law, etc. P.S. There are 2 updates today. Chapter 378. Snake Island. With Soren's enlistment order, all the pirates on the south coast began to move. The southern island country was a coastal principality. Although it was not as rich as Arendelle, it was still much better than other places. In addition, after Soren unified the south coast, private plundering was strictly prohibited. Many small and medium-sized pirates had no business recently. They could only follow the fleet controlled by Soren behind the scenes. Although the overseas route and the eastern route were quite profitable, it was also very time-consuming to go back and forth. Especially the eastern route, it took at least half a year to go back and forth. The profits earned by sailing for half a year were not as comfortable as plundering a merchant ship. Some people liked a stable life. But there were also people who liked excitement and adventure. Many pirates were still eager to reap without sowing. The Pirate King's enlistment order quickly received a lot of responses. Even those who were not interested in it planned to send some people to fight out of fear and to curry favor with Soren. Anyway, the navy of the southern island country was still in Arendelle. It was not their turn to deal with the regular army. Their task was to harass the coast. At worst, when the navy of the southern island country came back, they could sneak away. Most of the pirates were fast ships. They were not afraid of being caught by the navy. However, for this order there were other people who had other ideas. The next night, in a certain stronghold of the shipwrecked port, several other pirate leaders under Soren's command gathered here. Adele Isabella. Scarface frowned and looked at the other pirate leaders present. He said in a deep voice, "Why did you secretly call us here?" He was not the only pirate leader present. In addition to Scarface there was Cyclops, Giant, Knight, Butler and so on. Basically, except for the half-elf first mate, nearly half of the other pirate leaders were present. For the red-haired female pirate's invitation, the others did not seem to understand her meaning. At this moment they were also looking at her with a puzzled face. "This time I invited everyone here because I have something to discuss with you." The red-haired female pirate Adele Isabella looked at the pirate leaders present and said, "His Excellency Soren issued an order to attack the southern island country. In the order, he told us to act according to the situation. The focus is to harass the coast of the southern island countries and then find a way to weaken their strength. So, I have a bold idea." The red-haired female pirate waved her hand and asked someone to take out a map. Then she pointed to a mark on it and said to the other pirate leaders, "This is the capital of the southern island country. This is their coastline. This is the west coast route. From here to here, unless we barge into the Dark Tide Fishman's territory, we will definitely pass by the Dark Tide Canyon." At this point she turned to look at the others. To be able to be promoted by Soren all the way to the level of a pirate leader, most of the people present weren't simple. Very quickly, some of them guessed her thoughts, and even if they didn't, they understood something. If we attack the southern island countries, Arendelle's navy will definitely return to defend. The red-haired female pirate's expression was calm, and she said in a firm voice, "Sir Soren's order is very firm. It seems that he has reached an important strategic cooperation with Arendelle. So, if we can expand the results of the battle, maybe His Excellency will be very satisfied." One Eye has been listening quietly, playing with the dagger in his hand. When she stopped, he slowly said, "What do you mean? We ambush Arendelle's navy in the Dark Tide Canyon? Our chances of winning against the regular navy are not so high." The red-haired female pirate turned to look at him and slowly said, "We have at least a 60% chance of winning. In terms of equipment, we are not weaker than the regular army. In terms of combat power, all of our men are elites who grew up in killing. The navy of the southern island countries only trains a few times a month, and we are drifting on the sea all year round. Our chances of winning are higher. If we can damage or even destroy the navy of the southern island countries, then from here to here, it will all be our territory." The other pirate leaders present fell into deep thought. Knight looked up at the map and suddenly said, "Why not invite Kasa, half-elf first mate? He is the most powerful among us, and he has the most elite troops under his command." The red-haired female pirate's expression was a little stiff, and then she calmly said, because his status and power are high enough. Moreover, he has to contain and threaten the capital of the southern island countries. The Eastern Sea route is now under his control. If this mission is completed, as the commander of the Dragonhead warship, his contribution will definitely be greater than any of us present. If this operation is successful, then the route from Shipwreck Bay to the west coast and then to the southern island countries, and maybe even the route to Arendelle will be included in our territory. I think these territories should be handed over to other meritorious people to manage. What do you think? Hearing the red-haired female pirate's words, the other pirate leaders present could not help but fall into deep thought. Many of them had a slight light in their eyes. Yes, the half-elf first mate's power was already very high. He was in charge of the most prosperous Eastern Sea route, and his warships were much more than theirs. If he still contributed the most in this mission, according to Sir Soren's style of rewarding meritorious deeds, it was very likely that the territories near Shipwreck Bay would be handed over to him to manage. The pirate leaders present all had some thoughts in their hearts. They all wanted their own territories to be bigger, more men to have a higher reputation. If they could take down the west coast, it was equivalent to opening up the route to Arendelle. This was also a rich territory, and it was not much worse than the outer islands and the Eastern Sea route. If they wanted to go further, they must make greater contributions. From the north of Shipwreck Bay there was a big cake. If they took it down, many of them could become pirate leaders in charge of a region. What's your plan? The first person to speak was Scarface. His strength was greatly reduced because of the fall of Snake Island. Even if he later defeated the pirate king Ashrod, his territory was still the least among the other pirate leaders present. So he was the first to respond to the red-haired female pirate's plan and said in a deep voice, "It's not that easy to deal with a regular navy. We must make a detailed battle plan." The red-haired female pirate smiled when she heard that. She then turned her gaze to the other pirate leaders. Obviously many people were already moved. The benefits of the west coast were big enough. Their status was not as high as the half-elf first mate, but they still wanted to compete. Now that there was a chance to make greater contributions, they were naturally moved. Who was the half-elf first mate? At that time he was just a pirate sailor under the red-haired female pirate. Because of Sir Soren's promotion, he became the first mate of a ship. But what about him now? He was in charge of the Eastern Sea route alone. There were thousands of pirates under his command. There were also hundreds of warships of various sizes. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was above tens of thousands of people. The other pirate leaders present were the first or second in command of a pirate force. They might not really be convinced by the half-elf first mate. The red-haired female pirate, Adele, had always wanted to compete with him. Soren was quite cruel to the pirate leaders under his command. If they wanted to suppress the half-elf first mate, they had to make greater contributions. Arendelle. 3 days passed quickly, and Soren's figure once again came to the port. On this day, Arendelle seemed a little different because there was a strange fog near the port. This made others a little surprised and even alarmed some of the witches in the palace. However, they did not find anything. The port was also quite peaceful today. Everything seemed to be the same as before. However, at the bottom of the sea in Arendelle, a huge shadow gradually approached and finally stopped at a certain place, as if waiting for someone to arrive. Soren's figure gradually walked towards the sea. He stepped on the sparkling water and moved forward. When he got closer to the deeper parts of the sea, a huge black shadow appeared under his feet. The first thing to emerge from the sea was an extremely sharp bone spur, followed by a huge and ferocious back. Soren stood on the head of the mutant killer whale and gradually entered the deeper sea as it swam. Rumble. The sea in front of him separated in all directions. A black mast broke through the waves from the bottom of the sea, and then the ghost ship rose from the bottom of the sea. The surrounding fog became thicker. After the battle with the pirate king Ashrod, the ghost ship seemed to have gained some kind of improvement. The number of souls it bound had increased a lot, but there were no more obvious changes. It seemed that the death energy was not strong enough. As a kind of living undead, the ghost ship was a living machine, which meant that it also had the potential to evolve. Soren's figure flew out and landed on the deck of the ghost ship. Pata. He gently landed on the cabin, then raised his hand to take off the black cloak on his body and said, "Full speed ahead." Ah! The ghost ship moved and the ghost ship's sail opened automatically. The ghost ship broke through the waves at a very fast speed. Strange howls sounded, and the souls bound on the ghost ship seemed to have a hazy shadow. They moved around the ship like ghosts, making the ghost ship's speed even more amazing. This was a battle that belonged to one person. Soren was ready to fight the navy of the southern island country and the Vrykul pirates of Iceland alone. P.S. That's all for today. Chapter 379. The sky was clear for only one day. The next day there were dark clouds again and it looked like it was going to rain again. Soren stood on the mast of the dead man's voice and looked at the sea in front of him. On the side of the ghost ship, there was a huge black shadow. At the moment, it was undulating in the waves and only a shadow could be seen. He looked forward silently as if waiting for something. Soren had always been a very patient person, so he waited very calmly, but his eyes occasionally looked up at the sky. Rumble. A bolt of lightning flashed across the sky. Accompanied by the rumbling sound of thunder, drops of rain fell. At first it was just a light rain, but soon it became a rainstorm. Deep sea diving. Soren finally showed a smile, but it was cold and cruel. He gently waved his hand, and the undead on the deck quickly moved. In the strange whispers of the ghost siren, the dead man's voice began to descend, and the whole ship gradually sank to the bottom of the sea. The surrounding seawater rushed to the deck, and Soren gently jumped to the rudder, and then let the seawater completely submerge him. The seawater poured into the hull, and Soren's hair scattered with the seawater. When the dead man's voice finally sank to the bottom of the sea, he looked up at the sky. The wind and waves on the sea were getting bigger, and a bolt of lightning flashed across the sky. Rumble. The storm shrouded the sea and a bolt of lightning flashed across the sky. It seemed that the storm and rain had only stopped temporarily, and now it was just beginning. The sea was turbulent, but the bottom of the sea was quite calm. The dark deep sea could not block Soren's sight. The dead man's voice was diving hundreds of meters under the sea. He was calculating the enemy's position, and he had collected a lot of information before he set off. With his current reputation as the pirate king of the south coast, the Thieves' Union would rather offend the southern island countries than offend him. Rise 300 meters. Soren looked around. There was a reef in front of him and some fish in the sea, but because of the death energy, almost none of them wanted to get close to the dead man's voice. Mutant killer whales escorted around. Although the north coast was not as dangerous as the south coast, there were also some deep-sea monsters, and these deep-sea monsters did not seem to care about the blessing of the sea goddess. There were other gods in the world involved in the sea domain. For example, the god of the Vrykul people was involved in the sea domain from the pirate domain. The Vrykul people believed in a barbarian god. Should be the only god of pirate, but one of his clergy was Vrykul of pirates, and few other pirates believed in him. The birth of this clergy was due to the fact that the Vrykul were born pirates and lived by plundering other merchant ships. Rise 100 meters. Soren looked at the surrounding environment and observed the movements on the sea at the same time. After rising to a height where he could vaguely see the sea, a cold light appeared in his eyes, and he ordered in a deep voice, "Summon the fog. The undead to sink their warships." In the dark sea, a group of ferocious-looking undead appeared. They took the tools to sink the ship and slowly moved upstream, gradually approaching the sea. Boom! A thunderbolt crossed the sky and the wind and waves shook the hull. Damn it! A middle-aged man in a navy uniform cursed, then grabbed a corner of the hull and shouted, "All of you work harder. When we get back to the port, I'll treat you to a drink." This damn weather. I said the storm wouldn't end so soon. In this weather, how can a fleet go out to sea? There's no need to send us out to patrol. A wave came crashing over. The hull of the warship shook and the sea rushed to the deck. A Navy sailor stood unsteadily and hit the barrel, but he was not seriously injured. He just frowned and trembled in pain. What about the South Sea? The middle-aged man looked around. He didn't know when the fog had appeared around him. He couldn't help but curse again. This damn weather. How can it dance in a storm? Come on. Light the torches. Don't get separated from the escort fleet. It was a very strange weather. Logically speaking, it was impossible for fog to appear in such a storm. So the middle-aged officer who had been at sea all year round, intuitively felt that something was wrong. He shouted, "Everyone be alert. This fog is strange. Maybe we've encountered a sea monster." As soon as his voice fell, a Navy sailor screamed in fear. Hearing his voice, the others were suddenly frightened. The middle-aged officer immediately shouted, "What are you screaming for? What did you see?" Boom! The hull suddenly shook. Many people on the deck lost their balance and fell. There was also a sailor who almost fell from the ship into the sea. Fortunately, his ankle was entangled by a cable. Black shadow. The sailor who shouted at first said with a frightened face, "What a big black shadow! It's bigger than the ship. It's there. Under the water. I didn't see what it was. But there's something under the sea." The middle-aged officer's heart thumped, and his expression was a little scared. He murmured, "Don't tell me we're so unlucky to encounter a sea monster?" Boom. The hull shook again. Now, everyone could see that there was indeed a huge shadow wandering in the fog. The ship was shaking because it had bumped into it. No. Not good. Another exclamation sounded. A sailor who was drenched ran out and shouted, "The cabin! Water is coming in from below the cabin." Boom. The hull shook again. A sailor was directly thrown into the sea. He only had time to let out a mournful cry before he disappeared in the rolling waves. Buzz. Boom. The storm seemed to be getting bigger. The warship was still shaking in the waves. The waves made it look like a small boat that could capsize and sink at any time. Gotcha. The sound of the keel breaking came from the hull. Then the warship shook violently. Finally, it turned over in a huge wave and sank to the bottom of the sea little by little. On the sea, incomparably sharp bone spikes appeared one after another, and an incomparably huge shadow swam in the sea. Vaguely, one could see the blurry shadow of a pitch-black warship in the sea. Help! Help! Someone help me! The sinking warship did not immediately kill these sailors. In fact, many of them were low-grade professions. Their tenacious vitality allowed them to still swim up after sinking into the sea. But at this time a black cable flew out of the sea. The black hull on the bottom of the sea became clearer and clearer. The cable entangled the sailors who fell into the sea, and then dragged them deeper into the sea. Faintly, some humanoid monsters with seaweed-like bodies appeared nearby. They rushed over with a hideous smile and mercilessly slaughtered those who escaped the net. Dragonbone Island. This was an island occupied by the Vrykul pirates. It was said that a dragon was buried here, so it was called Dragonbone Island. The area of the island was not very large. It was estimated that it was not the size of Snake Island, but it had a semi-natural port because a steep mountain wall blocked the whistling sea breeze. There was a lighthouse built on this island. Basically, any port city would have a landmark lighthouse, which could guide the sailing ships. Even lighthouses in some places could guide ships to avoid reefs, greatly improving the safety of the fleet at night. Why haven't they come back yet? Above the lighthouse, a young man dressed in standard aristocratic attire frowned and looked into the distance. He said in a deep voice, "According to the time, they should have come back long ago." Rumble. A bolt of lightning flashed across the sky. The lightning illuminated the sea in the distance, and the waves on the sea were getting bigger and bigger. "Your Royal Highness." Behind the young man was an old man with a white beard. He was wearing a delicate robe. He said in a deep voice, "They haven't come back yet. I'm afraid they are in trouble." Prince Hans's expression suddenly turned ugly. He said with a pale face, "A standard patrol fleet, a large warship and 3 guard warships. Even if they are in trouble, how can they not come back? Could it be that Arendel's fleet attacked them? No. We joined forces with the Vrykul pirates last time to hit Arendel's navy. I'm afraid they don't even have the ability to go to sea now." This was the battle he was extremely proud of. First, he let the Vrykul pirates attract the attention of Arendel's navy, let them think that it was just pirates who came out to plunder, and then he mobilized a fleet to deal with these Vrykul pirates. But what he didn't expect was that near the Dragonbone Island, they also encountered the main navy of the southern island countries, which was the fleet led by Prince Hans. The result of the battle was naturally needless to say. Facing nearly twice the number of enemies on their side, Arendel's navy was almost completely wiped out. Arendelle was so badly hit that it was basically difficult for him to assemble a fleet to go to sea again. Near the port, with wave after wave, a broken piece of the deck gradually floated to the edge of the port. The nearby defenders seemed to have discovered it and hurriedly shouted loudly. There were more broken pieces of wood nearby, and the waves washed them nearby. Rumble. Another bolt of lightning flashed across the sky. Under the dark clouds, the waves on the sea were even more frightening. In the deep night, it was as if there was a terrifying monster silently watching the island, waiting to devour everything on it at any time. P.S. That's all for today. Chapter 380. Dawn came after the storm. Prince Hans stood at the port with a pale face, which made him look a little gloomy. No matter who it was, they would be in a terrible mood if they didn't receive any news of their patrol fleet after they left. It could even be said that they had disappeared without a trace, dead or alive. A whole day has passed, and the patrol fleet has completely disappeared since yesterday morning. No one knew if it was sunk by Arendel's navy, or if it sank in the storm last night. Logically speaking, a storm of this level could not threaten a large warship. Last night's storm at most overturned some fishing boats. Your Highness. A heavily armed young man quickly walked over, knelt on one knee and said, "There's no news. The warships sent out to search have no clues." Time passed little by little. Soon the warships sent out to search today returned to the port one by one. Prince Hans, who was waiting at the port, glanced at them and his face immediately turned ugly. He frowned and said, "Where's the Orion? Didn't the Orion go out to sea together today?" Hearing his question, the others also looked around in surprise. Sure enough, the Orion warship was not found. However, the warships sent out to search had just returned, so someone comforted the prince. "Your Highness, don't worry, the Orion may still be behind. I've told them not to leave the nearby sea area today, so as not to be attacked by Arendel's warships. If there's any movement, they will immediately send a signal flare, and we can see it directly from here." Prince Hans nodded, but his expression was still ugly because his intuition told him that things were not good. On the calm sea, a broken hull was sinking little by little. Soren stood on the deck of the Dead Man's Voice with a blank expression, watching the sinking warship in front of him. He was playing with something similar to a firework in his hand, and his expression seemed to be thinking about something. After about a moment, he directly opened the signal flare, accompanied by a bright light, and then a very eye-catching firework exploded in mid-air. Even during the day it could be seen from afar. Deep-sea diving. Soren looked at the island in the distance, then ordered in a deep voice, "Summon the fog. Undead drowned, prepare for battle." The ghost ship gradually dived into the bottom of the sea, and a fog appeared on the nearby sea. However, because it was daytime, the fog only made everything look a little hazy, and the scope seemed to be reduced a lot. It only covered the nearby sea. At the other side, near the port of Arendelle, above a towering lighthouse, Princess Anna also looked into the distance with a sad face and whispered, "Did you not see their warships today? In order to seal off Arendel's port, warships from the southern island countries would appear in the nearby waters once a day. They didn't dare to attack the port yet, so they could only temporarily seal it off. After all, Arendelle was still a kingdom. No matter how badly damaged their navy was, they still had the basic ability to defend themselves." "Your Highness." Standing next to her was a bearded general. He put down the monocular in his hand and said in a deep voice, "I didn't see any enemy patrol warships today, not even the Vrykul warships." Princess Anna frowned slightly and whispered, "Could it be that they withdrew their troops?" "It's unlikely." The bearded general shook his head and said, "I'm more worried that they want to attack the port. Last time they shelled the lighthouse, but our fleet immediately attacked and forced them to retreat. The number of enemy warships is twice as many as ours. I'm afraid they won't give up so easily." Princess Anna was silent. She seemed to have not slept well for a long time. Her beautiful face seemed a little haggard. She murmured, "If only my sister were here. I'm so useless." The bearded general looked bitter and said in a deep voice, "It's all because of my incompetence. If I hadn't discovered their trap, the kingdom's navy would have been able to fight at sea. Your Highness' talent is unquestionable. During this time, His Majesty has managed the kingdom's affairs in an orderly manner. It's all my fault." Princess Anna waved to stop him and whispered, "General Bassa, don't blame yourself. We didn't expect them to be with the Vrykul pirates. A kingdom's regular navy actually joined forces with a group of notorious Vrykul pirates. This kind of thing would damage the kingdom's reputation. They also didn't expect Prince Hans of the southern island country to do this. Many kingdoms had jointly issued a pirate decree in the past. Arendel's prosperous economy was due to the decline of pirates. After all, there were not many pirates in the world like Soren. Most of the pirates were chaotic and relied entirely on robbing merchant ships to survive." "Your Highness." The bearded general named Bassa suddenly raised his head and pointed to the distant sky. "Look over there. There's a situation." A flame shot straight into the sky. The signal flare was so bright that even Arendelle could see it clearly. This was a specially prepared alchemy item that could be seen far away. Dragonbone Island. As time went by, Prince Han's face became more and more ugly. When the other warships returned, he still didn't see the Orion. He said in a deep voice, "Look out? Haven't you seen the Orion yet?" "Your Highness." A naval officer standing next to him suddenly raised his head and pointed to the sky and said in a deep voice, "Look. Signal flare. There's a situation over there. It should be the signal flare sent by the Orion." Prince Hans was shocked when he heard the words and immediately ordered, "Gather the fleet. Let the Vrykul pirates go together." A patrol fleet went missing last night, and another warship didn't come back today. Intuition told him that something bad had happened, so he immediately ordered the fleet to gather and set off. The fleet of the southern island country gathered quickly, and the navies that had been on standby boarded the ships and went out to sea. The Vrykul pirates also appeared in the port. Their number was only half of that of the southern island country, but most of them looked fierce. A burly man with a horned helmet said a few words to Prince Hans and boarded a dragon-headed warship. Perhaps because the missing warships were from the southern island country, the Vrykul pirates looked indifferent. Less than one-third of the pirate ships went out to sea. However, in the end, hundreds of warships, large and small, moved toward the location where the signal flare was fired. In the blue sea, Soren's hair fluttered with the current. He quietly watched the sea, waiting for the enemy to appear. Harvesting heads was undoubtedly the fastest way to gain slaughter EXP, especially since many of the navies of the southern island country were advanced professions. Just last night's battle, he gained nearly 50,000 slaughter EXP, and this was because many enemies died in the hands of the undead and the mutant killer whales. At this rate, he was afraid that he didn't need to complete the chain quest of the 4 elemental stones. As long as he defeated Prince Hans's navy, he might enter the legendary realm. Soren's slaughter EXP had now reached a total of 230,000, and he could upgrade the Shadow Dancer profession level at any time. This time he didn't save the slaughter EXP, but directly upgraded the Shadow Dancer to level 6. The Shadow Dancer profession has been upgraded to level 6. Received 32 DX 26 plus INT 22 to 10, *0. 5, skill points, HP increased by 14, profession HP 8 plus, con 22 to 10, *0. 5. At this stage, Soren's speed of improvement was slow because he had entered a bottleneck period, which was the realm of the half-legendary. Only when his strength broke through the legendary realm would he receive a greater improvement. At that time he would be able to master Danger Sense, Reflex Evasion, and Flexible Mind as rewards. The legendary realm was a huge watershed. After entering the legendary realm, Soren could further master the legendary combat skill, Shadow Step, as well as the legendary ability, Shadow Realm. Warriors and barbarians who had just entered the legendary realm would receive the most obvious improvement because at this time, they would receive the ability, Epic Strengthening. After this ability appeared, they would become quite inhuman. Under normal circumstances, the incarnation of the gods had more than 500 HP. Among all professions, only warriors and barbarians could reach this level. Epic Strengthening, if raised to the limit, could increase the HP by more than 300. They were able to bathe in the magma because of their abnormal vitality. As for the other professions, they would probably need a long time to learn and train after entering the legendary realm, especially spellcasters who needed a lot of time to learn and master legendary spells. After entering the legendary realm, the rogue's ability to fight head-on would be pulled apart by the traditional melee professions, so mastering Shadow Realm was the key to deal with them. Soren had received a message prompt. 2 more times and he would be able to master Shadow Realm. At that time, no matter how strong the enemy was, he could try to escape across the plane. As he got closer and closer to the legendary realm, Soren's slaughter EXP needed to level up his professions also doubled. His current professions were level 10 Commoner, level 7 Rogue 0186500, level 6 Shadow Dancer 0215000, level 10 Wizard 0148500, grade 4. 2 more professions and he would enter the ranks of the legendary professions. However, the last 2 professions were also the most difficult because he might need close to 450,000 slaughter EXP. After deducting the current slaughter EXP, there was still a gap of nearly 400,000. According to the gains from last night's battle, he would need to do at least 9 more times. In other words, he would need to sink at least 50 warships from the southern island nation. P.S. That's all for today. I'll start adding more tomorrow. This lunar Fuda's performance was terrible, sorry? Chapter 381. There's fog. Prince Hans stood on the deck and looked around. He said in a deep voice, "Why is there fog in this weather? Your Excellency Kenlodo, please expel this fog." Standing next to Prince Hans was an old man in a robe. He nodded and said, "Okay. This fog is a bit strange." The light of a spell appeared. As the old man in front of them cast the spell, a gust of wind blew in all directions, blowing away the fog on the sea. However, a new fog soon appeared, blocking their vision, but it didn't seem as dense as before. The old man standing next to Prince Hans frowned. He raised his hand and cast another spell. It seemed that he was a high-grade warlock, so he didn't need to memorize spells in advance. Under normal circumstances, sorcerers rarely memorize spells like this. This fog isn't formed naturally. The high-grade warlock named Kenlodo had a dignified expression and said in a deep voice, "It seems that something is summoning the fog. Your Highness, we may have encountered a sea monster." Normal fog would not appear on the sea so strangely, and it was only in this area. There was no geographical environment nearby that could form fog, so according to the high-grade warlock speculation, the most likely possibility was that there was a sea monster here that could summon fog. Damn it. Prince Hans hammered the deck of the ship and said slowly, "Why did a deep-sea monster suddenly appear here? So the missing battleship yesterday and the missing Orion today were all done by it?" The high-grade warlock nodded gently and said, "It's very likely. If it was a sea monster that attacked them, I'm afraid they are all dead." Prince Hans nodded with a gloomy expression and said in a deep voice, "Can we kill it?" The high-grade warlock next to him pondered for a moment, then turned to the naval officer on the side. After asking a few questions he said, "Yes. The Vrykle pirates have some whaling cannons on their ship, and we also have some equipment on our ship to deal with large sea creatures. If we can find it, we should be able to kill it." Prince Hans showed a smile on his face and said in a deep voice, "But how do we find it? This is the sea. If it hides at the bottom of the sea, I'm afraid we can't do anything. Lord Kenlodo, please take care of this sea monster. Otherwise, I'm afraid our warships will be attacked again. If this happens, it will be a great blow to our morale." The high-grade warlock hesitated for a moment and then said, "I'll try." A faint light of magic appeared. Then, something that looked like an eye appeared in front of him, and the situation around the fog gradually became clear. "Found it?" A trace of excitement suddenly appeared on the face of the high-ranking warlock, and he said in a deep voice, "It's in front. It really is a deep-sea monster." It was a huge shadow. Through the light produced by the spell, the other people present also saw a trace. It was a very large black shadow, wandering on the seabed in front of them. Its body was probably much larger than the largest blue whale. With such a huge body, it was obvious that it was a deep-sea monster. After seeing this huge shadow, a smile appeared on Prince Hans's face, but soon it became serious again because such a monster was not so easy to deal with. "Prepare for battle." The admiral next to him quickly gave an order and shouted, "Load the whaling cannons. Everyone prepare for battle." The fog in front of them became a little thinner. With the order of the admiral, the fleet was scattered a lot so as to avoid being affected in the battle. The fleet sailed forward in a fan shape. To deal with this kind of giant sea monster, only by opening up space could they cause tons of damage. Because of some unknown energy mutation in this world, possibly related to the energy radiation of the Arcane Empire, some mutant creatures often appeared in the sea. The most common of them was the giant octopus, so the navies of these southern island countries had experience in dealing with sea monsters. The calm sea seemed to be brewing a terrible storm. The vague huge shadow was locked by the warlock spell. Even Prince Hans, who was standing on the deck, was a little nervous. After all, it was not easy to deal with such a monster in the sea. "Warning!" The scattered warships in front of them suddenly exclaimed, and then someone shouted, "Enemy found! It's Arendel's navy. Prepare for battle. Prepare for battle." What? Prince Hans looked up in surprise, and then saw a fleet with Arendel's flag in front of them. The number of the other side was obviously less than theirs. It seemed that because of the fog in the sea, they did not discover each other until they were closer. When they saw so many warships of the southern island countries in front of them, Arendel's fleet also seemed a little flustered, and seemed to be planning to turn around and retreat. "Kill them." Prince Hans's expression was obviously excited, and he said in a deep voice, "Don't worry about that sea monster for the time being. As long as we don't provoke it, It shouldn't dare to attack so many people. Order the warships to move forward at full speed. We'll destroy this Arendel's fleet. On the other side, a bearded general was also standing on a large warship. When the nearby fog gradually thinned, his face suddenly changed and he said in a deep voice, "Not good. It's the fleet of the southern island countries. Damn it. We've fallen into their trap." The signal flare that rose into the air today was too obvious. Even Arendelle saw it. Although he suspected that it might be a trap, in the end he decided to lead his fleet to see the situation. In order to avoid being intercepted by the enemy, all the ships he brought out this time were fast ships. If it wasn't for this strange fog, he should have seen the enemy's tracks from afar, but because of the fog obstructing their vision, they only discovered the enemy when they got closer. Therefore, the first reaction in his mind was that he had fallen into the enemy's trap. Rumble. The roar of cannons sounded. The warships that first entered the range fired continuously, and the leading warships of the Vrykul pirates quickly rushed over, wanting to board the enemy's deck. Only the pirates' fast ships can catch up with them. Many of the fleets of the southern island countries are medium-sized warships with fierce firepower. However, Arendel's fleet also reacted very quickly. Following the general's order, they immediately turned around and retreated. It seemed that they had no intention of fighting with them. In fact, they didn't have the ability to fight at all. If the warships want to increase their speed, they must give up their firepower. Most of the fast ships don't even have half of the firepower of a medium-sized warship. A large warship like the Dragonhead warship can be equipped with hundreds of cannons. It can be said that even the dead man's voice may be blown up in a head-on naval battle. Of the warships sent by Arendelle, the strongest was only 24 cannons. Shooting at each other was simply a matter of life and death. However, Arendelle also has their advantage, that is, Arendelle has a group of ice witches. The fog became even thicker. The ice witches seemed to have cast a spell to strengthen the fog on the sea, making it gray 50 meters away. Many of the gunfire hit the sea, and Arendel's fleet could only see a vague shadow. The Vrykul pirates screamed and rushed into the fog. When the distance was 100 meters away, the navy of the southern island countries couldn't even see their pirate ships clearly. "Don't fire." A naval officer stopped the gunners from loading and said with an ugly expression, "Those idiots rushed up. It's easy to accidentally hurt them if we fire now." The field of vision in front of them was very small. The possibility of accidentally hurting allies like this was too high, and it was difficult to aim at the enemy unless the distance was reduced to a certain extent. At the same time, just as the navy of the southern island countries was about to annihilate Arendel's fleet, a huge shadow slowly rose from the dark bottom of the sea. Near this huge shadow, a ghost ship gradually floated up. The undead of the drowned had a grim smile on his face, and he swam up little by little under the cover of the fog. The battle had just begun. The unexpected appearance of Arendel's fleet did not affect Soren's plan. P.S. Today's third update. Love you. Chapter 382. Boom. Boom. The sound of continuous artillery bombardment could be heard. No one noticed that under the calm sea, there were already some hazy shadows approaching these warships. With a muffled creak, a southern island warship suddenly shook, and then a huge black shadow slammed into it. The hull was directly knocked over, and many of the sailors on it fell into the sea. The fog on the sea became thicker and thicker. Although the sound here could be heard, it had become unclear in the sound of gunfire. The warship of the Vrykul pirates caught up with Arendel's warship. The pirates threw out hooks and boarded the deck. Soon a fierce hand-to-hand battle broke out. Shouts of killing could be heard everywhere. The sky was covered by fog, and it was difficult for the ship to navigate in it. At this time, Prince Hans found that he had completely lost control of the fleet. He could only mobilize the 20 or 30 warships around him. As long as the distance was more than 500 meters, not to mention giving orders to fight, even the shadow of the warship could not be seen. The hull of a warship was basically more than 5 meters long. Unless they sailed close together, it was easy to pull away and disappear without a trace. This damned fog. Prince Hans slammed the deck and said in a deep voice, "Can't you disperse it? The other warships have lost contact, and they can't see the flags hanging up." The visibility of the fog was at most 10 meters. Beyond this distance it was all hazy. There were faint screams nearby, but it was not known whether it was Arendel's navy or Prince Hans' own men. Not good. The high-grade warlock standing next to him suddenly changed his face slightly and said in a deep voice, the deep-sea monster floated up. Boom. There was a sound of impact in front, mixed with the excited howls of the Vrykul pirates. It seemed that they had caught up with one of Arendel's warships. Gotcha. There was the sound of the deck breaking. The undrowned undead with wet seaweed appeared. They rushed over with a grin, waving their sharp blades to harvest the enemies who fell into the sea. In the ocean, even people with higher profession levels might not necessarily be able to defeat these undead that did not need to breathe. The sea was their main battlefield, and the advantage of these undead that did not drown was too obvious. Animated ropes shot out from the pitch-black seawater, entangling the enemy's body and dragging them to the bottom of the sea. It was like a bloody mouth devouring everything. Blood spread out. There was a slight change on the body of the ghost ship, Dead Man's Voice. There were many dead souls on the ghost ship's sail, and a faint dark red line appeared on the ghost ship's sail. Those were naturally formed lines just like blood vessels. They were not enchanted by someone else. Soren's expression was cold. He concentrated on controlling the rope on the Dead Man's Voice. After harvesting the enemies on the battleship, he paused for a moment and then turned his target to another group of enemies. However, at this moment, he discovered that one of Arendel's battleships seemed to be on the verge of collapse. The Vrykul pirates were more ferocious than the pirates on the south coast. If it weren't for their small number, they would be the real overlords. In terms of combat power, the Vrykul pirates should be the most ferocious of all the pirates. Soren frowned and thought for a moment, then ordered the undrowned to board the ship, and at the same time, controlled the mutant killer whale to rush over. Arendel's navy was still useful. With them, the fleet of the southern island countries could not react so quickly. These battleships could at least confuse the enemy's line of sight and temporarily divert their attention to facilitate Soren's actions. On the sea, sharp bone spikes appeared one after another. The huge body of the mutant killer whale floated to the surface of the sea and then directly crashed into the battleship of the Vrykul pirates. The ship shook violently. Many of the Vrykul pirates who intended to land on the enemy's battleship all fell into the sea, and what greeted them was a bloody mouth. The mutant killer whale opened its huge mouth and swallowed a group of people. 5 layers of sharp teeth cut the enemy into pieces, and almost no one was left alive. Rise. Soren glanced at the surrounding pirate ships and immediately ordered, "Prepare the cannons of the Dead Man's Voice. Load the heavy boomerangs." After so many battles, the number of undrowned didn't increase much, but the number of resentful sea monsters working on the ghost ship increased a lot. The undead trapped on the ship moved quickly. As a black mast broke through the surface of the sea and rose, the cannons of the undead's voice were loaded. The surrounding waves separated. In the thick fog, the dead's voice broke through the waves, followed by a dull sound of gunfire. 24 cannons fired continuously, and in an instant the pirate ships on both sides were riddled with holes. At the same time, the heavy boomerangs at the bow of the ship fired continuously, penetrating the hull of a dragonhead battleship on the spot. Then a large amount of seawater poured in, and the dragonhead battleship in front of them was almost sinking. What is this? The Vrykul pirates, who were besieging the Arendelle navy, were instantly stunned. No one expected that a warship would suddenly emerge from the bottom of the sea. At the same time, the firepower was so fierce that they didn't even have a chance to react. Ghost ship. With the appearance of the dead's voice, some people also saw its true appearance through the fog. The broken hull, the dark ghost sails, and the rich death energy spread in all directions. As long as people were close to it, they would feel a chill from the soul. Twisted souls danced in the air, and indistinct cries of agony could be heard. Standing on the deck were the vengeful spirits of the sirens, and the undead of the Sawajin grinned as they boarded the enemy warship. Ghost ship. Even the Vrykul pirates, who ranked at the forefront of the pirates in terms of ferocity, felt cold at this moment. After all, the undead were not living people. The terrifying legend of the Spectre ship had long spread throughout the world. They might not be afraid of powerful living enemies, but it was inevitable that they would be a little frightened when they fought with these ferocious undead. Sea monsters attack. After many battles, the ghost ship had also improved a lot, but this improvement did not have a qualitative change. It was still the accumulation of quantitative changes. With Soren's order, some half-real and half-virtual sea vengeful spirits flew up and pounced on the enemy with bared fangs and brandished claws. Then a series of screams could be heard. At this time, the attributes of Spectre ship and Dead Man's Voice were very different. Creature name, Ghost ship, Dead Man's Voice. Mutated undead construct creature type. Activated ghost ship. Creature description. This is a battleship that sank hundreds of years ago. It woke up at the bottom of the sea, and the souls and wraiths of the dead gradually assimilated with it, turning it into a ghost ship that roams the sea. There were many legends about it. Finally, it attracted the attention of the believers of the sea goddess. The legendary priests captured these ghost ships, and then secretly activated these ghost ships into low-level undead life forms under the divine power of the sea goddess. It has a simple consciousness and can recover itself like the undead. This ghost ship can sail in any sea. Its power in the sea is terrifying. Note, killing and death made it slightly mutated. Captain, Soren. Sailor, drowned undead, 72 people. Ocean Wraith, 24 people. Ocean Spectre, 108 people. Naga Banshee, 12 people. Undead Sharkman, 11 people. Bound Spirit of the Dead Speaker, 1105 people. Equipment. Drowning Howl Ram. Cannon of the Dead, 24 pieces. Ghost Sail, mutated. Heavy Revolving Cannon, 2 pieces. Basic skills. Summon Fog, Ghost Ship's characteristics. Deep Sea Diving, Activate Life, Activate Ropes. Curse Ship Hull, Dead Voices characteristics. Special skills. Soul Eater, characteristics. The change of the ghost ship happened after the number of bound spirits of the dead exceeded 1,000. Soren only noticed it recently. In the original ghost ship's characteristics, it had an additional special form, mutated undead construct life. At the same time, the number of undead sailors on the ship gradually increased due to the increase of bound spirits. The most obvious ones were the sea monsters and sea ghosts. And the original underwater navigation ability had become deep sea diving. Soren was not sure about the specific effect because he had not yet steered the ghost ship to dive too deep into the sea. Finally, the ghost ship had an additional special, Soul Eater, characteristic. Even Soren did not understand this characteristic, but with the appearance of this Soul Eater characteristic, the ghost ship's spirit binding characteristic disappeared. In the past, the ghost ship had a spirit binding characteristic, but now it only had the Soul Eater characteristic. Ocean ghosts flew out one after another. These half-real and half-virtual undead creatures had a 50% physical attack evasion ability. In the past, Soren also relied on holy water to kill the ghosts he encountered. Now, these Vrykul pirates were even more difficult to deal with. What is that? A ghost ship. On Arendel's ship, the bearded admiral reached out and wiped the blood on his face, then looked ahead in surprise. A ghost ship suddenly appeared on the side of the warship, and it looked like it was helping them deal with the Vrykul pirates. This kind of thing was very strange and they were completely unprepared. However, he quickly grasped the opportunity and began to gather his men to prepare to kill the enemy on the deck. A ghost ship might not be able to change the situation. The most important thing was to find a way to escape before being surrounded by the enemy. Chapter 383. The undead did not feel tired. Accompanied by the sound of gunfire, the undead on the dead man's voice moved quickly and poured firepower to the left and right at an astonishing speed. Very soon, 3 enemy warships were sunk by the cannon fire. The animated ropes that danced in the air swept out like venomous snakes, entangling the approaching enemies one by one. Soren stood on the deck with the elven bow in his hand. He was not in a hurry to kill the enemy, but he shot arrows to kill the targets entangled by the animated ropes. Boom! The ghost ship, Dead Man's voice, shook a bit. After a round of fierce gunfire, the enemy finally reacted and began to turn the muzzle to fight back at the ghost ship. Even though the ghost ship was an activated undead construct and could automatically dodge the attacks, it was still hit by the dense barrage of cannon fire. There was a hole in the broken hull of the ghost ship. The seemingly rotten hull was actually very strong, and there was only a small hole in it. But the next scene subverted the knowledge of all the pirates. They only saw the wailing souls flying out of the ghost ship's sail, and then the hull that was penetrated by the cannonballs began to repair little by little. It was like the flesh and blood of a human body regenerating, and the place where the ghost ship was hit recovered little by little. This was the horror of the ghost ship. It would never be sunk as easily as other warships, but in order to repair the hull, the number of bound souls on the ghost ship also decreased slightly. These bound souls were part of the ghost ship. The ghost ship's recovery ability relied on these souls, because it was an animated construct of the undead. The number of bound souls of the dead was still abundant. In other words, unless the firepower was fierce enough to tear the ghost ship apart, Soren was not afraid of being sunk. But the role of the bound souls of the dead was very important. Whether the ghost ship could continue to improve its strength depended on the number of bound souls accumulated, so he did not intend to consume too many of them. Full speed ahead. Seeing that Arendel's warship in front of him was almost out of trouble, Soren immediately ordered, "Prepare the sinking whaling ram. Sink the ship in front." The ship began to accelerate. The sharp ram charged towards the pirate ship in front of him, instantly creating a huge hole in the ship. The submerged hull ram was the equipment Soren used the least. If it wasn't close enough, he would have preferred to use the alchemy rune, the dead man's cannon. Retreat. Turn around. Following Soren's order, the dead man's voice didn't need anyone to steer the ship. It directly turned the ghost sail around and pulled away. Soren looked at Arendel's marines in front of him and said, "Deep sea dive." Rumble. Seawater surged in from all directions and the ghost ship, dead man's voice, sank to the bottom of the sea little by little. Under the cover of the fog, it became more and more hazy, leaving only a ship full of astonished sailors and a broken ship floating on the sea. The enemy's bodies were devoured by the mutant tiger sharks. The whole battle took less than 5 minutes, and a round of salvo from the dead man's voice severely damaged the Vrykul pirates. As the dead man's voice gradually dived to the bottom of the sea, the mutant tiger sharks also began to dive and finally the sea returned to calm. This. On Arendel's warship, the bearded general had a shocked expression on his face. After a long time he murmured, "Ghost ship. Ghost ship. Black sail? Dead man's voice? Soren the beheader? Is it the pirate king who ran rampant on the south coast? Why is he here? Why is he helping us deal with the enemy?" His heart was full of doubts, but there was certainly no answer now. What? Prince Hansa's face changed dramatically and he said angrily, "Gone? What about those Vrykul pirates? Are they all dead?" The situation on the battlefield changed rapidly. The pirates who just felt that they were playing a game of cat and mouse, after losing contact with several warships in a row, instantly felt that the role had been reversed. They felt as if there was a shadow in the fog, waiting for the opportunity to hunt them down. The sound of gunfire. Screams. The roar of battle. They heard a lot of sounds in the fog, but they couldn't see the situation on the battlefield. When they followed the sound, they only saw the spreading blood and the gradually sinking hull. They lost at least 10 warships. But they didn't even see the enemy's trace. Some people only vaguely saw a huge shadow moving in the sea. Fear spread. The unknown enemy was the most terrible. Prince Hans was so angry that he couldn't extricate himself, but there was nothing he could do. Because until now he hadn't found any trace of the enemy. This damn fog covered everything. Even Arendel's warship was gone. The high-grade sorcerer standing next to him suddenly said, "Your Highness, there's a living person there." There was a wooden barrel floating in front of them. There was a bloody pirate sailor holding it. After all, Soren was not a god. It was difficult to guarantee that no one would escape from such a battle. "Hurry up." Hearing this, Prince Hansa's spirits were lifted and he immediately shouted, "Pick him up. Hurry up and get him up." The sailors on the deck moved quickly. Soon someone rescued the pirate. His breath was very weak. His chest was penetrated by a wooden plank and he wouldn't live long. What happened? Prince Hans grabbed him and shook him hard, saying, "Hurry up and tell me. What happened in front of us?" The pirate sailor gradually regained consciousness. He opened his eyes with difficulty, and then his face showed a look of fear. He trembled and shouted, "Undead. Black sail. Ghost ship. Monster. Dead. Dead. All dead. All dead." The words were a little incoherent. However, the words that came out of his mouth shocked everyone nearby, and they felt a chill run down their spines. It was as if there was a cold gaze watching them in the fog. Undead? Prince Hans's mouth was a little dry. Ghost ship? Black sail? How could it be? Where is the ghost ship here? How could it be? When did a ghost ship appear near Arendelle? As a person who lived in a coastal country, he certainly knew the terrible legend of the ghost ship. This kind of thing was more terrible than the monsters in the deep sea. Until now, there were very few people who had really seen it. "Your Highness." A naval officer next to him swallowed and lowered his voice. "Legend has it that where the ghost ship appears, there will be a fog that can't be dispelled. I'm afraid there are really undead here. How about, let's retreat first?" He was afraid. Not only him, but the other sailors on the deck could not help but feel a little fear after hearing the news about the ghost ship. One must know. People who died on the ghost ship could be imprisoned on it forever. Chapter 384. Retreat. Prince Hans's expression was uncertain, but in the end he gritted his teeth and said, "Let's retreat to Dragonbone Island first. The current situation is very unfavorable to us. Wait until we figure out the enemy situation before we deal with them." Damned fog. This strange fog completely crippled them. They couldn't find the enemy's trace and there was no way to command the battle. Everyone was like a headless fly in the fog. If the enemy was really a ghost ship, their losses would only be greater if they stayed here. The undead ignored the fog. They observed the world according to the color of the soul. The vision of the undead was more like the vision of the spiritual world. It was a gray color and they could see the light of the soul. In this case the enemy could find them but they couldn't find the enemy. Woo woo woo. A desolate bugle horn sounded, signaling the retreat of the warships. The warships around them all stopped. What's going on? Why did they suddenly retreat? Where are they? Why is old Deco's ship gone? Wasn't it nearby just now? Bursts of voices came back. Those targets targeted by the dead man's voice were naturally doomed, but those warships that were not targeted by the dead man's voice had been running around until now and had not encountered any enemies at all. Only when the others heard the horn of retreat and gradually gathered around Prince Hans's warship did they find that there seemed to be a lot of people around them. One of the fleets that had set off with them had even completely disappeared. What's going on? Where are Kenner and the others? Why did they come back? Some admirals of the southern island countries looked around in surprise. After the horn of retreat was blown, Prince Hans's warship began to retreat, and the other warships naturally followed. As they gradually left the area covered by the fog, everything nearby gradually became clear, but when Prince Hans counted the warships under his command, his face became quite stiff. A total of 16 warships were gone. 5 of them were the warships of the Vrykul pirates, and the others were all his men. The fog in front of them was still thick, and it had become quiet inside. Without the sound of cannon fire, they could vaguely hear wails and cries that sent chills down their spines. It wasn't a man's wail but more like a rather sharp half-male half-female voice. It was like the background music in a ghost story. It was quite horrifying to listen to. At first, the sound of gunfire was too deafening. Now that it had quieted down, everyone who heard the sound felt their hair stand on end. "It's a wraith." The high-grade warlock standing behind Prince Hans had a dignified expression as he murmured, "And there are quite a lot of wraiths." Vengeful spirits were a special kind of undead life form. Their wails could directly cause an effect similar to the intimidation spell. Ordinary people with weak willpower might directly faint from fright. Retreat. Prince Hans stopped the fleet outside the fog and waited for a moment, then gritted his teeth and said, "Let's go back first." It seemed like the battleships that did not catch up would not be able to return. The ghost ship did not leave the scope of the fog, which made his idea of hitting the target fail. Until now he was not sure if the ghost ship appeared here by accident or if it was reinforcements invited by Arundel, because everything was too coincidental. As soon as they arrived at the location of the signal flare, they encountered Arundel's navy, and then they encountered this strange ghost ship. If this was really Arundel's reinforcements, then the situation was a bit bad. Prince Hans couldn't help but feel a little gloomy when he thought of this. As the fleet of the southern island country left, some pale white phantoms vaguely appeared in the fog, and then a black ghost ship appeared. "Come back." As Soren's voice fell, the sea wraiths flying around the ghost ship all floated down, and then one by one they integrated into the ghost ship's sail. He did not chase after the enemy because no matter how strong Soren was, he was only one person and one ship. Legendary professions may be very powerful, but there were more than 1 or 2 of them who had been besieged by the enemy. Even the saints, who were the incarnations of gods, could be besieged and killed. A quasi-legendary like him naturally did not dare to take risks. In fact, his purpose had been achieved. The navy of the southern island country had been hit so hard, and the morale would definitely be much lower. At most, the news of the south being looted by pirates would come in a few days. At that time, the navy's sailors would be eager to return home. Prince Hans would not stay here to fight with Arundel unless he was crazy, and would not care about the pirate army raging in the southern island country's waters. Once his navy retreated, it would never be so easy to make a comeback. Soren had prepared a big meal for him on the west coast. He mobilized the pirate army to control the west coast and backed by the Northern Witch Council. As long as he finished his work, he could teach Prince Hans a lesson at any time. Night fell. Soren stood on the deck and looked at the sky. The stars tonight seemed a little dim, and many of the once bright stars seemed to be gray at the moment. These lights were getting weaker and weaker. It seemed that it would not be long before they went out. Even the bright moon under the night sky seemed to have a gray veil. Time passed little by little. Soren quietly waited for midnight to come. Dealing with Prince Hans was certainly not just a matter of defeating him on the sea. Soren was a quasi-legendary rogue. If a professional like him wanted to deal with a person by hook or by crook, the result would be terrible. If he was not sure that Prince Hans, as the crown prince of a country, would be protected by high-grade professions, he would be more inclined to directly behead the target. But this behavior was too risky. He was not sure how many legendary items Prince Hans had, let alone how strong the person responsible for protecting him was. Soren had always been very cautious. He would not do things that he was not sure of. Deep-sea diving. With Soren's order, the ghost ship dived into the sea again, and then gradually approached the location of Dragon Bone Island. A huge black shadow in the sea also moved with it, and finally stopped about 3 kilometers away from Dragon Bone Island. Get ready for battle. Soren changed into a suit and with a cold light, he pulled out his curved sword. The ghost ship was quiet. He looked at the undead who were ready to stand by and said in a deep voice, "Be ready to support me at any time. If you see fire, bombard the enemy's dock from the south." The undead Naga siren nodded and said, "Yes, master." Shadow hide. Soren's figure escaped into the night. With a magic aura, he gradually floated from the ghost ship and then landed lightly on the sea. Soren's toes tapped lightly on the sea, and then his whole body flew out. He stepped on the sea surface at high speed, and his whole body approached the location of Dragonbone Island like a sharp arrow. Soren was an assassin in the Underdark. If it weren't for the Drow matriarch who wanted to squeeze him dry, Soren would have become a Nightwalker in the Underdark. Soren had been active in the Underdark for many years, and he had long been familiar with the means of assassination and guerrilla warfare. Today, dealing with the navy of these southern island countries was just a small test. Pada. Soren's figure lightly landed on the wooden planks on the side of the port. There were warships docked on the dock and many guards were responsible for training. He was not in a hurry to attack but waited patiently. Found it? Soren's eyes flashed with a cold light, and then quietly moved towards a dark corner. He approached quietly and then in an instant he pulled out his sword. Wuxia. Blood splashed out and Soren slowly put down the body in his hand. A hidden sentry. His long-term experience told him that this kind of action must be carried out first. Prince Hans led the army to attack Arendelle this time, and it was impossible for him to not have 1 or 2 high-level rogues around him. Next. Soren's figure disappeared into the night again. Only when these hidden sentry were taken care of, tonight would be his wanton hunting feast. It seemed that he had not fought like this for a long time since he left the Underdark. Fortunately, his skills were not out of practice. Chapter 385. A cold light flashed. The guard who was patrolling slowly fell to the ground, covering his neck. Soren reached out and grabbed his body before it fell to the ground, and then put it in a dark corner around the corner. The enemy would not leave him much time. The patrolling guards would change shifts every once in a while. When they found something unusual or saw these corpses, the alarm would sound soon. Shadow hiding. Soren observed for a moment with a blank expression, then bent down and leaped. With a slight landing sound, his figure had jumped to the roof next door. He moved forward stealthily, reached out and grabbed the corner of the roof as he approached it, and then landed lightly. In front of him was a room. There was a sound of snoring coming from inside. The sailors would not stay on the ship after docking. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Soren counted the number of people in the room, and a cold light appeared in his eyes. He gently pushed the door open, and then quickly slashed at one of them. With a splash of blood, he instantly slashed at another person. A cold and ruthless light appeared. Soren slashed 3 times in an instant, directly stabbing the enemy's fatal point. Then he rolled forward and slashed at the other 3 enemies again. The whole process took less than 3 seconds. Soren simply slashed 6 times in a row, and then left 6 dead bodies in the room. A top rogue who let go of his bottom line was quite terrible. because no profession could be better at stealth and assassination than a rogue. If they did not have scruples, the final result would be quite terrible. If he had been an assassin instead of a shadow dancer, which was more suited for frontal combat, then tonight would have been a nightmare for everyone. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, Arendelle. The palace was brightly lit at night. Princess Anna sat on the throne and listened. Next to her were the fully armed captain of the maids and a witch in a dark blue robe. Ever since Prince Hans had sealed off the port of Arendelle, the number of guards in the palace had doubled. There were countless open and hidden sentries, and the court witches had also been summoned to set up alarm spell traps everywhere. After all, Princess Anna was not Princess Royal. With Princess Royal's terrifying strength, every move in the palace was under her control. But now that Princess Royal had mysteriously disappeared, only the palace witches could protect Princess Anna's safety. That's how it is. Below the throne was a bearded general with bloodstains on his body. After wiping the sweat from his forehead, he said in a deep voice, "After discovering that something was wrong, I withdrew from there." The hall was silent. Princess Anna was wearing a pure white lace dress. After listening to the bearded general's report, she whispered, "You mean?" A specter ship appeared nearby. "Are you still helping us deal with those enemies?" "Yes." The bearded general nodded and said in a deep voice, "It didn't attack us." "I'm afraid that's the case." Hearing his words, the others present obviously did not believe it. The ice witch standing on the right side of Princess Anna frowned slightly and said, "Most of the specter ships are wandering undead. Even if they appear, I'm afraid they won't help others. Maybe it happened to be attacking the Vrykul pirates and not you. Maybe it's just a coincidence." The bearded general glanced at her and said in a deep voice, "I'm afraid that the specter ship is controlled by someone. I don't know if your Royal Highness has heard of the beheader?" "The beheader?" Princess Anna's expression was a little blank. Since the mysterious disappearance of Princess Royal, she had been exhausted. On the one hand, she had to worry about the safety of her sister and find ways to find her. On the other hand, she had to deal with many things in the kingdom. As a girl who had just reached adulthood, it was not so easy for her to deal with the huge affairs of a kingdom. Sometimes she was so tired that she fell asleep on the desk. Especially after the Vrykul pirates looted the coast of Arendelle, there were more things she needed to deal with. In fact, she did not know much about things outside the Frost Kingdom. The beheader? The only one present who had heard of this name was the Ice Witch. She was surprised and said, "Do you mean the pirate king who has recently risen on the south coast?" "The beheader, Soren. It is said that he also has a powerful specter ship under his command. How did he appear here? Is this the Frost Kingdom? And he is said to be active on the south coast. I'm afraid it's more than half a continent away from here." "Soren?" When she heard the name from the Ice Witch, Princess Anna could not help but tremble and then stood up in disbelief. Clatter. The crystal cup placed next to the throne fell to the ground and was accidentally knocked down by Princess Anna. But at this time she was not in the mood to care so much. Her voice was a little surprised and joyful. She murmured, "Soren? Do you mean his name is Soren? Did he appear? Did he really appear? Did he come back?" Hearing Princess Anna's somewhat incoherent words, the others present were puzzled. Only the captain standing next to her was surprised. Perhaps she did not know who the beheader was, let alone the pirate king who rose on the south coast half a continent away, but she knew the name Soren. She was even familiar with this name because this name was mentioned more than once in Princess Anna's mouth. "Is it really him?" Princess Anna seemed to suddenly remember something and said anxiously, "No. It's too dangerous. He's alone. Summon the army immediately. I'm going to help him. How can he deal with so many enemies alone?" The captain looked at the emotional Princess Anna and immediately reached out to hold her down. She said in a deep voice, "Your Majesty, don't worry. Maybe it's just the same name. Moreover, if it's really him with his cautious character, he shouldn't act rashly. I'm afraid we have to figure it out first." Princess Anna gradually calmed down, but her expression became firm. She said seriously, "It's him. It must be him. He said that when I need him he will come back and he will stand behind me." Dragonbone Island. Under the pitch-black night, the massacre was carried out silently. After an unknown amount of time, a patrolling guard finally noticed that something was wrong. Then he saw the corpses that were dragged to the corner. A sharp alarm sounded. In an instant, the whole island was alarmed, and the shouting spread everywhere, waking up those who were still asleep. Enemy attack. Enemy. Assassin. There was a burst of panic, but it was eventually drowned out by a series of explosions. Rumble. There was a series of explosions near the port. It seemed that the place where gunpowder was stored was ignited. The explosions turned the entire port into a sea of fire. But this was just the beginning. Boom, 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 boom. The sound of artillery fire came. In the dark night, a fog appeared in front of the port, and then a black warship appeared from the fog. The intense firepower poured down on the warships docked near the port. Chapter 386. A raging fire was ignited. As the gunpowder barrels in the warehouse were detonated, the entire port had turned into a sea of fire, and as the fire spread, the sails of some warships were directly ignited. It seemed that the wind was fanning the fire, and more than a dozen warships were on fire. Although the hull was made of wood, it was not so easy to ignite it. Only the sails were the easiest to ignite, and the fire immediately burned them up and then gradually spread to other places. Boom! A series of gunfire sounded, and the dark ghost ship fired continuously at the port. When the enemy realized that a warship had lifted anchor, they gradually escaped into the thick fog. At this time, Soren's figure could no longer be found. Only death, fire, and destruction were left on this island. Prince Han's somewhat panicked figure appeared. There were many guards around him and there were a few vague figures. After finding signs of other high-grade rogues' assassination, the number of people responsible for protecting Prince Hans doubled. At this moment, there was no anger on Prince Hans's face, but a trace of fear, a terrible fear caused by a deep sense of powerlessness. Although there seemed to be only one enemy from beginning to end, he still felt like a prey trapped on this island, and could be swallowed by the enemy at any time. The fog under this night was like a prison, and he could not even determine where the enemy was. It's a high-grade rogue. A vigorous figure with a veil appeared and gently landed beside Prince Hans. He said in a deep voice, "The killing method is simple and neat. It is very likely that he is an assassin close to the legendary level." Soren's assassination method was very similar to that of an assassin. In fact, in the Underdark, even rangers had received combat training as an assassin, let alone an orthodox rogue like Soren. "Can you find him?" Prince Hans turned his head and said with a stiff expression, "Is he still on the island? Can you find him?" The masked man standing beside him shook his head with some difficulty and said in a deep voice, "The other party is proficient in stealth. There are no traces nearby. He may have left the island." "Your Royal Highness, this kind of high-level assassin is very dangerous. It's very difficult for others to discover him. From now on, it's best if you don't leave my sight." Prince Hans turned his head with difficulty, looked at the high-grade warlock next to him and said in a deep voice, "I can be protected by you, but what about the others? What if he sneaks in like this every day to assassinate others?" "Sir, is there any way to find this assassin?" The high-grade warlock pondered for a moment and then said, "If I can find his approximate position in advance, I can use magic to break his stealth. But the entire island is so big that we can't possibly monitor every place. It would be very easy for him to sneak in. Unless there's an expert in tracking who can find him in advance." The fire was gradually extinguished. However, the losses were quite heavy. The leader of the Vrykul pirates yelled angrily because many of his pirates were killed in their sleep. This way of dying was a disgrace to them because they didn't even get to see the enemy's face. "I can arrange some magic traps." The high-grade warlock looked at the fire around him and unconsciously felt a little nervous in his heart, as if someone was watching him. He said, "But don't expect too much. This kind of high-level assassin is also very good at disarming traps. If he wanted to assassinate someone, the first target must be Prince Hans, and the second target was likely to be a spellcaster like him. So he also felt a little scared at the moment. In fact, there were not many high-grade rogues because many rogues were stuck at the level of petty thieves. If they wanted to advance to a high grade, they had to undergo strict training and gradually grow through killing. The casualty rate of rogues in the adventure team had always been high because they had to explore, disarm traps, and investigate the enemy. A little mistake could lead to eternal damnation. The number of high-level assassins like tonight was even rarer, and it would be even more difficult to deal with them. For a first-class assassin, it was not difficult to kill spellcasters below the legendary level. "How are the casualties?" Prince Hans stood in the crowd and asked a naval officer next to him, "How many of our men did we lose?" The naval officer looked a little panicked and lowered his voice. The casualties are not very high. Many of the dead were Vrykul pirates. Many of our men were on the ship. But our gunpowder warehouse was ignited, and I'm afraid there is not enough ammunition. There was also an explosion in the place where we stored the materials. The loss is probably not small. Prince Hans heard the words and slammed the wall in front of him. He said with a ferocious expression, "Damn it! The result of this night's battle was quite brilliant." Soren stood on the deck of the Dead Man's Voice, watching the flames on the distant island that had not yet been extinguished. He did not expect that the enemy would set up the warehouse where the gunpowder was stored near the port, and the defensive force was not very strong. This was simply great luck. Then there was the scene after he evacuated. He directly ignited the gunpowder barrel and blew up the whole warehouse. This time, the navy of the southern island countries could be said to have suffered a heavy blow. It was estimated that they would not be able to attack Arendelle with only the materials stored on the warship. Because of today's incident, he was afraid that they would increase their defense in the next few days. Soren was going to take it slow and wait for the incident on the west coast to brew. As long as the news of the southern island countries being attacked by pirates came back, Prince Hans would not be able to sit still. After taking one last look at the burning Dragonbone Island, Soren ordered the Dead Man's Voice to return. Today's battle was very rewarding. Because after so many battles, Soren finally got a legendary level special background ability. Death Walker. Death Walker, legendary background ability. You have become accustomed to death and blood after killing again and again. Ending life has become as simple as eating and drinking for you. You are ruthless to the enemy. You have ended thousands of lives in your hands. You have begun to ignore death. In battle, you will awaken the ability of the Death Walker, which will make you have no mercy for the enemy. Even spells such as Friendly Spell will not affect your judgment at all. At the same time, the aura of death will further strengthen your intimidation ability, forming a kind of pressure that affects all nearby people. Any enemy who fights with you must go through a force test of will. Otherwise, they will fall into a state of panic because of fear. Permanent will +3, intimidation +50. Note, because you have ended too many lives, you may attract the attention of some beings in the spiritual realm. Death Walker. As Soren's enemies reached more than 1,000, he finally got this legendary slaughter background ability. And because of the additional intimidation ability of the Death Walker, Soren's intimidation had become a basic skill, second only to sneak and knowledge. His intimidation skill had reached 135 points. However, the most important ability of the Death Walker was not the increased will and intimidation, but the intimidation effect caused by the death energy. This was an invisible range ability. It could be understood as a weakened version of Dragon's aura, making weak enemies lose the courage to fight when facing him. This ability could greatly strengthen Soren's way of coping when facing a siege. If combined with the Gaze of Fear ability added by the Divinity of Fear, ordinary soldiers would not even have the courage to fight against him now. This was similar to the ability of demons. High-grade abyssal demons would inflict fear on the enemy in battle. Many times an army had the ability to kill a high-grade demon, but in the end they were easily defeated because of fear. Dawn was coming. Before Soren got close to Arendelle, he let the ship dive to the bottom of the sea, and then returned to the port alone. He was waiting for news from the south. Chapter 387. Rumble. Bursts of gunfire resounded over the town of this southern island. Pirate ships with black sails could be seen near the port in the distance. Hundreds of cannons fired at the city wall at the same time, and a gap was blasted out in just one round of fire. The fierce vitality suppressed the defenders on the city wall, and they could only find ways to hide in the corner. There were cries and shouts everywhere in the town. This sudden attack frightened the civilians who usually lived a comfortable life. Damn it! A man dressed in noble attire shouted, "Return fire! Fight back quickly! Why are there pirates here? Black flag! Aren't they the beheader's men? Why are they attacking us? Aren't they afraid of the kingdom's revenge?" Rumble. What answered him was a second round of gunfire. With the suppression of firepower, speedboats were released from the pirate ship in front. Groups of ferocious-looking pirates began to disembark with weapons in their hands. Some jumped directly into the sea and then rushed towards the town ahead. Bursts of strange cries sounded, and the pirates waved their weapons and rushed towards the town's defenders, launching an almost one-sided massacre. "All of you charge! A cold light appeared in the one-eyed man's eyes and he shouted in a deep voice, "Don't worry about those ordinary people. Break through the governor's mansion. What can those civilians do? Let's end this quickly. There are troops from the southern island countries stationed nearby. We must retreat before they arrive." Rumble. The one-eyed man killed a guard with a swing of his sword, glanced around and then said, "Follow me. This is the Chamber of Commerce's residence. Charge in." A group of pirates rushed over and fought with the guards of the Chamber of Commerce. The whole town has been plunged into war, but the core of the battle was still where the nobles and merchants lived. The slums were not affected much, because no pirate would be stupid enough to rob there. There was no profit there. At most they could snatch some rotten bread and a few pieces of copper deals from them. Soon one of the Chamber of Commerce's residences was captured. Among the bloody corpses lying on the ground, 2 burly pirates carried a box. At this time, another garrison counterattacked, and they immediately picked up their weapons to fight. Whoosh! The box he was carrying fell to the ground, and kindler and silver deals immediately spilled out. The shiny gold coins attracted the attention of many people. Then a few guys who looked a little different from the pirates rushed over and grabbed a handful of gold coins, ready to stuff them into their pockets. Clang! A cold light flashed. One-eyed pirate swung his sword and beheaded the pirates who were trying to rob him. He then looked around coldly. His gaze stopped on the leader of another group of pirates and roared, "Have you forgotten the rules set by Sir Soren? Whoever dares to act recklessly will end up like him." There were clearly 2 groups of pirates attacking. One group was well organized and ferocious, attacking the warehouses and mansions in a planned and arranged manner. The other group was looting wherever they went. Some pirates wanted to retreat after getting something. Needless to say, they were just a small group of pirates that fought alongside him. Broken. The storehouse has been breached. Cheers came from the front, followed by shouts of killing. One-eyed dragon looked around and said to his confidants, "Follow me." Boom. The door of the storehouse was smashed open, and the wealth inside was immediately revealed to the others. There were boxes of kindler and silver deals, a variety of other goods as well as food that was collected as taxes. The southern island countries were quite rich. The entire storehouse was filled to the brim, and there were also many swords and weapons. "Take it away. Take it all away. Hurry up and take it away." One-eyed dragon smiled with satisfaction, then shouted, "Has the governor's mansion been breached?" "No." A young pirate replied, "There's a magus there. We've suffered a lot of casualties. Xanadu and his men have retreated. Let those guys go and waste their time with them." "Wizard?" One-eyed dragon heard this and narrowed his eyes, then said, "Then let them have it. Hurry up and take it away. The army should be here in half a day." Boom, boom, boom. The sound of gunfire continued. On the east side of the town, there was a castle built halfway up the mountain. The mansion at the foot of the mountain had been breached, but the nobles who ruled here had retreated to the castle. Without enough firepower, it was very difficult to capture the castle. After the first wave of attack was defeated by the defenders, a group of pirates had retreated. "Damn it." An old noble stood on the castle and roared, "Where are the reinforcements from Nag City? Why haven't they come yet? These damn pirates. I want." Boom. A pirate warship turned around and fired at the castle halfway up the mountain, but it was beyond the range of the cannons, so it was basically useless. The battle was still going on. However, some pirates began to retreat in an organized manner, carrying boxes of gold, silver, and goods back. In the end, they didn't even let go of the food in the storehouse. They carried sacks of it back to the warship. The whole town was a mess. Many places were on fire and cries could be heard everywhere. Sporadic battles were still going on in some corners. By the time these pirates retreated, the whole town had almost turned into ruins. The only intact place was the slums, which had no profits. Another place that was almost unaffected was the temple. Few pirates dared to attack the temple, so it had become a shelter for the poor. Many old, weak women and children hid here to seek shelter. The power of the gods made mortals fearful. Even these fierce and cruel pirates did not dare to attack the temple. Boom, boom, boom. There were cheers and howls on the pirate ship. The gunners fired a few more shots at the town in front of them and then left calmly. The same scene happened in many places. The pirate leaders under Soren's command, as well as the scattered pirates summoned by the corresponding pirate kings, looted the cities along the coast of the Southern Island Kingdom. The endless attacks made the army of the Southern Island Kingdom exhausted. Except for a few towns that were not captured, many places were looted like here. And because the kingdom's navy was taken out by Prince Hans, now they couldn't even go out to sea to fight. They could only hide in the town and defend passively. The sea had completely become the world of pirates. Everything seemed to be in a mess. The pirates were rampant. The Southern Island Kingdom had to issue an order to retreat and evacuate all the towns along the coast. As long as they were far away from the coastline, the pirates had to go ashore to attack. Once they went ashore, they would be no match for the regular army. And as long as they were far away from the coast, it would not be so easy for the pirates to retreat. A heavy cavalry of the Southern Island Kingdom could make them suffer. But it seemed that all the pirates had no intention of going ashore to fight. Chapter 388. Arendelle. Soren sat in the corner of the Copperforge Tavern and waited quietly. About half an hour later, the gloomy man he had seen before appeared here. Compared to the last meeting, this time his expression was more respectful, and there was even a trace of panic and fear. It seemed that he didn't dare to look directly into Soren's eyes. "Your Excellency." He bowed slightly and handed a sealed document to Soren and said in a deep voice, "This is what you want." Soren nodded and reached out to take it, then opened it and quickly glanced at it. He slowly said, "Has the attack begun? It seems that Prince Hans will retreat soon. Help me pass on another order. The fleet of the Southern Island countries has been hit hard. I need them to gather the enemy in the Dark Tide Strait and hit the fleet of the Southern Island countries." The gloomy man immediately nodded, then glanced at Soren. Seeing that he had no other orders, he quickly left. No matter what, the order from above was to try to be on good terms with the Pirate King. The Thieves' Union was also optimistic about his ability. The next day, Dragonbone Island was in a mess. Half of the port was destroyed and many warships needed to be repaired. Prince Hans stood near the port and watched all this. There was a deep sense of frustration on his face. Just a ghost ship made him so embarrassed, which made him feel weak and powerless. Hurried footsteps sounded. The figure of the high-grade sorcerer appeared behind him. Before he got close, he anxiously said, "Your Highness, something bad has happened. This is the news sent by the kingdom." Hearing the words of the high-grade sorcerer, Prince Hans's heart skipped a beat. The spellcaster had a fifth circle communication skill, so he had always been in close contact with the Southern Kingdom. He anxiously reached out and took the document. After a brief glance, his face turned pale. He seemed to have suffered a great blow. He murmured, "The beheader, Soren? So it was him who attacked us. Why did he attack us? Why did he help Arendelle?" The high-grade warlock looked at Prince Hans's pale face and reached out to touch him. He said anxiously, "Your Highness, the most important thing right now is not why Soren the beheader attacked us. Instead, it was because the situation in the kingdom was already very bad. Our coastline has been completely lost, and the enemy is running amok in our sea region. Every place along the coastline may be attacked. His Majesty ordered us to retreat immediately. Without the ability to go out to sea, the pirates' warships could directly bombard the cities along the coast. Now the entire Southern Island nation was in a state of panic, especially when many gods began to fall silent. After the priests did not get any response, they could not even pray for help from the temple. The pirates from the south coast were just like the Viking pirates that invaded Europe. They were like locusts that plundered any place that could be attacked. Retreat. Prince Hans's face was pale as he muttered, "Order the army to retreat." The attack on Arendelle had ended in failure. All the plans had become a dream. The original purpose of blocking the northern sea route to the west coast had also completely failed. Prince Hans could imagine how much blame he would receive when he returned home. The nobles would blame him and the kingdom would blame him. And the brothers that he had worked so hard to defeat might have already begun to plan a comeback. In the end, he might not even be able to keep the throne that he inherited. Go back. Prince Hans's expression gradually recovered, and his eyes were dignified as he said, "I must go back first. As long as I inherit the throne, I can still make a comeback. The army is still in my hands. Everything still has a chance." Speaking of this, his expression was slightly distorted as if he was planning something. He looked at the high-grade warlock behind him and said with a ferocious expression, "I want to see the Sea Witch. I have completed the agreement, and she must help me take the throne according to the agreement." Hearing Prince Hansa's words, the high-grade warlock's face changed slightly, and then he lowered his voice and said, "Your Highness. Let's go back and talk about this." Arendelle Royal Palace. Princess Anna looked at the bearded general in front of her with surprise and said in disbelief, "What? You mean the enemy has retreated?" "Yes." The ice witch standing next to her nodded and said, "We have been monitoring the nearby waters and can be sure that they are retreating." "Great." Princess Anna stood up happily. Then a trace of worry and sadness appeared on her face and she murmured, "Is it him? Why didn't he come to see me? Does he hate me that much? He came here but he won't even see me?" Hearing Princess Anna's sad words, the others next to her looked at each other. Finally the ice witch said, "Your Highness. There is news that the pirates on the south coast have attacked the southern island countries. I am afraid that it is really Sir Soren who secretly helped us. The enemy also retreated in a hurry because of the attack from the rear." Princess Anna nodded blankly and murmured, "Is that so? Then why didn't he come to see me?" There was a burst of hurried footsteps. At this moment a guard suddenly rushed up and shouted, "Not good. Ghost ship. A ghost ship has appeared in the port." Everyone raised their heads in surprise. Princess Anna rushed out and ran toward the port. "Let's go." The captain glanced at the others and quickly followed. Soon they caught up with Her Highness who was trotting in front. The port of Arendelle was filled with fog. Through the fog, a black warship docked in the distance could be seen. The black hull, the black sails, and the black flagpole made people feel deep pressure at a glance. A huge black shadow wandered around the specter ship. None of the nearby ships dared to approach. Everyone was looking at them with awe and fear. "Soren." Princess Anna looked at the black warship in the distance. She didn't know why tears fell down. She put her little hand to her mouth and shouted, "Is it you?" There was no response. The dark ghost ship seemed to be empty. It stayed for a moment near the port of Arendelle, and then gradually disappeared into the fog. The dark clouds dispersed. The bright sun shone on this rich and beautiful city in the Frost Kingdom, and everything seemed to have returned to normal. The clouds of war were fading. The mysterious disappearance of Princess Royal did not make this rich country decline, because they knew that there was another person, another figure guarding here. Guarding the mistress of this place. Maybe he didn't show up, but she believed that he would appear again when she needed him. Because this was his promise. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.